Here on this channel, I share real-life encounters with beings. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dark Sleep Radio. From beyond the skis to help you unwind and drift off to sleep before we're divin', I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now find a comfortable spot relaxing. Let's begin. It was one of those nights where I couldn't sleep, and the house just felt too small. The air inside was warm, and still event though it was early October, and the temperature had started dropping at night. It took my old fleece blanket, a thermosoft tea, and my binoculars out to the backyard, around 1A. It wasn't anything serious. I'm not an astronomer or anything, but sometimes I like looking up, especially when it's quiet and the skies clear. I live in a pretty rural part of Oregon outside a little town called Lebanon. Note a lot of flight pollution out here. You can still see the Milky Way on a good night. That night was one of those Nanamu now wind, and the sky was sharp and full. I laid back on the lawn chair with a blanket over my legs and just watched for a while. The binoculars weren't great. Old Nikon pair, it got at a garage sale, but they work fine for stargazing. I was mostly scanning the eastern part of the sky. I could see Orion coming up. It's always been my favorite. I was focusing on the belt when in noticed a cluster of lights shire up a little off to the right. They weren't stars too low, and they had this weird bluish tint, not pure white like stars, not blinking like planes. They were in a loose triangle kind of wide, and unevenly assumed they were drones at first. People around here, them sometimes even late, but these weren't moving. The way drones usually do, we watched them for maybe a minute or two. They just hovered, staying perfectly still. And I was starting to lose interest until they all shifted at once, not a slow movement. Just snap a new formation like someone rearranged them instantly. They went from a triangle to a perfect straight line, equidistant till lowered the binoculars and blinked a few times. Thinking maybe I'd misjudged it. When I looked again, they'd shifted again. Now they were in a square, still not moving. Otherwise, no sound, not rails, nothing. That's when it started feeling wrong. Is a tup straighter, resting the binoculars on my knees. My tea was still warm, untouched. The air around me suddenly felt a little thicker. It's hard to explain, like the pressure changed. I felt it before, right before thunderstorms, but this was different. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. He went back to the binoculars. The lights hadn't moved. Again, still in that square. But now they were pulsing, just slightly fading in and out in sync, not like blinking. It was smoother, almost like breathing. I got up and took a few steps farther into the yard to get away from the tree, and my feet were cold through my socks. But I didn't want to go back, and I didn't want to take my eyes off those lights. I had this, not a fear exactly, but this heavy feeling that if I stopped watching, I'd miss something I wasn't supposed to. After maybe 30 seconds of that pulsing, they started to move. All four lights drifted apart evenly, staying on the same plane, no sudden shifts this time. Just as low glide outward like petals opening. Then they froze again, and then without warning they all shot straight up. It don't meant they got smaller gradually like a plimming. They just disappeared upward. Gone. I lowered the binoculars. The sky looked normal again. I stood there for a minute, not sure what I'd seen. It was like everything just clicked back into place. It hot, maybe it had been military. I've heard jets and helicopters fly over before, but this was different. No noise, no delay between movement and sight. Just gone. I stayed outside a while longer, scanning the sky again, but there was nothing. The stars were back to being just stars. I finally went inside around 2:30, locked up behind an event, though I always feel silly doing that. Outer the dog, Lenny, didn't even get up from her bed when I came in. Usually she barks when I've been out for a while, but not that time. She just looked at me like she knew I'd something. The next day, I went in line to check for reports. No power outages, no weather anomalies, no chatter about lights in the sky. I called my neighbor, Mel, who sometimes keeps his telescope out overnight, but he hadn't been stargazing that week. Said he was working night shifts. I didn't tell him what eyes. All that whole week, the sky felt different to me. He still looked up out of habit, but I didn't take the binoculars out again for. While there was this weird silence to the nights that hadn't been there before. Knolls, no crickets. It tried to convince myself it was just the season changing, but it didn't feel like that. I haven't seen anything like it since, but every once in a while, on really clear nights, I catch myself staring at the same part of the sky. Waiting. Was driving back home late one Friday night on Route 67 at Who Lane stretch of Hig Way that cuts through the outskirts of town and then runs alongside a patch of woods before it hits the freeway. It's not a busy road, especially that late. Maybe 2 or 3 cars passed me the entire hour. I was on it. The weather was clear but cold. Late October, early fall, chill in the air. I had my old border collie Rosie in the passenger seat, their head resting on the console. She wasn't barking or anything, just the usual quiet company on these drives around 11:50 p. Just as I was passing the billboard near Mill Creek Road, I noticed it flicker. It wasn't the usual kind of flickery you get with old electrical stuff. thought that the billboard, which normally advertised local businesses or upcoming events, suddenly blinked out completely for a second, and then flashed back on with this strainer of light, so don't know how to describe it exactly, but it was a symmetrical design, like a kaleidoscope, made of white and blue dots arranged in shapes that looked almost like as now flake, or some kind of geometric symbol. It was glowing, but not like a normal neon or LEDs. The light seemed softer and more organic, for lack of a better word. The odd thing was every time it tried to look directly at the pattern, it would vanish, not just fade, like it was erased or switched off or blinked a few times, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me. But every time I glanced off center, there it was again, perfectly bright and clear. The flicker repeated for maybe 20 seconds, blinking on and off in short bursts, the pattern shifting slightly, but staying symmetrical as lowered down and pulled over onto the shoulder. Just out of curiosity, Rosie's atoop and stared out the window, where Spurkta stepped out with my one trying to get a picture, but every time I raised the camera and looked through the screen, the pattern disappeared. No matter how it ride, front camera, back camera, even the flashlight on, nothing showed up. It was like the billboard was playing some kind of trick. I leaned against my car and stared up at. When I looked just beside the sign, the shapes came back, pulsing gently. The light had dark depth to it. It not just flat, it felt like it was hovering or floating just a few inches off the billboard surface. But I couldn't figure out how. Then the whole billboard went dark for maybe 10 seconds, and when it switched back on, it's how to normal at again, a coffee shop promo with a smiling guy holding out. Anything strange at all, just the regular kind of stuff you expect from a highway sign. To get back in the car and thought maybe I was tired or imagining things. Rosie nudged my hand with her nose. She looked calm but alert. A few minutes later, when I was about a mile down the road, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. There was a second billboard coming up on the left side, one I'd never really noticed before. This one had been dark the entire time I was driving, but now it flickered once briefly, showing the same kind of symmetrical pattern. Isa want the first sign. It was the same pale blue and white glow, but this time the shapes looked a little different, more like interlocking triangles than snowflakes again. Every time I turned my head to look directly at it, vanished, slowed down again. But this time I didn't pull over. It was like the pattern was only meant to be seen out of the corner of your eye. That unsettled me, but I don't know why exactly. But it felt like someone or something was trying to get my attention without actually letting me focus on it, like a secret message. I wasn't supposed to catch it. Driving, the roads were mostly empty, and the only other sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. Rosie stayed quiet, occasionally glancing toward the windows. About 10 minutes later, I passed a third billboard, the one just before the freeway entrance. It didn't flicker or fall ash like the others, but as I glanced up at it, something weird happened with the streetlights along the highway. They dimmed all at once for maybe 5 seconds. The whole stretch of road went slightly darker, and for a moment the only light came from the billboard itself. That light was just a plain bright white glow, no patterns this time. Then the streetlights flickered back on like nothing had happened. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, checking my rear view mirror. Nothing behind me except the usual sparse traffic. I pulled onto the freeway on ramp and started heading toward the town. The weirdness didn't stop though. On the freeway, the radio went static for a solid minute, cutting out every station. It might have been the ones that usually come in clear. Then suddenly the static cleared and the stations came back as if nothing happened. Rosie wed softly, which she never does and carries unless she's restless or nervous. I reached over and petted her head, trying to shake off the weird feeling creeping over me. By the time I got home about 30 minutes later, everything looked normal. Again, the neighborhood was quiet. The porch light was on like all. AC Goten and took Rosie inside. She immediately went to her bed and lay down. I checked the photos on my phone. Nothing but dark, blurry shots off the highway and some streetlights. No patterns, no strange flickers. Later that night, it tried to sleep but kept thinking about those billboards. He wondered if I imagined the patterns or if it was some glitch with the electricity in the area. But the fact that it happened 3 times on 3 different signs, plus the weird blackout of the streetlights and the radio static, made me doubt that. Even checked the local news and utili tire ports the next day. Nothing about ages or power fluctuations, nor reports of strange lights or phenomena anywhere near Route 67 over the next week. I drove that same route a few times at night, watching closely. None of the billboards flickered again, and the streetlights stayed steady. Rosie never seemed nervous again, either. Still, every time I'm on that road late at night, I can't help but glance at those billboards out of the corner of my eyes. Sometimes I swear I catch a glimpse of those same symmetrical shapes faintly glowing, but then they're gone. These kinda look straight. I don't know what it was. I don't know why it happened, and I don't know if I want to find out. I didn't expect to come back to my campsite and find everything arranged like some kind of weird ritual. We'd been out on the Pine Ridge Trail, a stretch of woods a couple hours east of Asheville. It was early September, and the weather was cool but clear, dry enough for a good fire the night before. I was solo hiking and camping, which you sually prefer, except this time something didn't sit right. I'd left camp around 9 a.m. that morning, planning to hike a few miles further to the overlook and back. By afternoon, Rosie me golden retriever mix stayed with me the whole time, except I'd tethered her to a tree while I went down a rocky slope to check out a small stream that was around 11:30. When I got back, the campsite was office, where it was exactly as I'd left, except it wasn't all my stuff was moved, and it was arranged perfectly in a circle, like someone had taken their time placing every item down my backpack, tent poles, shoes. Event the little stove and fuel canister. Rosie was loose, standing right in the middle of the circle, looking at me like she didn't understand what was going on. I had no idea how long it had been like that, but the grass beneath the circle had these faint scorch marks, nothing heavy or burned through, just kind of darkened and brittle like a campfire that barely caught, but there was no smell of smoke. Just those faint rings pressed into the dirt at first. It thought maybe some other camper should come through while I was gone. But new Niels was around, and there was no sign anyone had been near, no footprints, not rash. No evidence of people at all, except this arrangement. I started gathering my stuff back together, but it felt wrong every time. I moved an item. Rosie growled low and kept staring into the trees around us. Checked the woods all around the site. No signs of anyone. That's when the quiet started feeling strange. Usually this part of the trail is full of bird song, or the rustle of small animals, especially in the morning, but the woods were dead silent. Now in, no bugs, no birds, nothing, just the occasional snap of fat wig, but only when I moved it, packed up as fast as I could, Rosie never leaving my side the whole time. I had this sense that something was watching me just beyond the tree, and it may be 30 or 40 yards away, but every time I glanced over, there was nothing. The hike back was tense. The silence followed me the whole way. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Usual for a forest. Rosie stayed close, ears prick muscles. Tense when I reached the trailhead parking lot. I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was nearly 300 p.m. Me'd been gone, maybe 4H. Our total butte, it felt like more like time was off. Somehow the strangest part came when I got home that evening. He unpacked my backpack, and among the gear was a small patch of scorched grass, stuck to the bottom of my water bottle case. It was dry, brittle, and smelled faintly of something burnt, but I couldn't figure out where it came from. It wasn't part of the campsite dirt, and I didn't recall picking it up anywhere else. Rosie seemed tired and uneasy all night, at pacing between the living room and the bedroom here. He has wide watching corners and shadows. I couldn't see the knee. XT day I went back to the site with a friend, Tom, who hikes the area a lot. Wanted to see if anything else had changed. We found the spot where my camp had been, and sure enough, the faint scorch marks were still in the grass. Tom looked closer, and pattern was weird, like a rough circle with tiny arcs radiating out from it, almost like a symbol. He said it looked deliberate, but didn't recognize it from any camping or survival signs. Neither did I. We took some photos, but on my phone the marks didn't show clearly on his phone. The pictures were just blurry with patches of light that flickered in and out when you looked at them. We agreed to keep it to ourselves. Didn't want to sound crazy. Since then I've kept Rosie close, and every time I'm in the woods, now I feel like I'm being watched, not by animals, but something else. I don't know what exactly happened that morning, who or what moved my gear, or why it was laid out that way. It doesn't feel like any normal camping prank or mistake. It just feels wrong. I was doing a routine patrol near the southern boundary of Cedar Ridge Park. Just before dusk, it was late April, the air still holding a cool dampness from an earlier rain, and the trail was muddy enough to leave clear prints. I'd been with the Park Service for a few years by then, and I was used to weird stuff, broken branches, odd sounds, the usual evidence of animals or careless visitors. But that night I found something I still can't explain. It was shiking the ridge trail, heading back toward the ranger station after checking the old fire lookout tower. My dog, Luna, was with me. She's a German Shepherd mix, mostly calm, but alert, and she kept sniffing around, poking through wet leaves and sniffing at logs. Like usual, we'd been out for maybe 2 hours, and the fading light was starting to make the woods feel colder than its hood for April. About halfway down the slope, the trail dipped near a small, muddy clearing by the creek. That's one of the prints. They were huge, too big to be from any animal I'd ever seen in the park, and definitely not human. Stopped, knelt down, and looked closely. The tracks were circular, like perfect rings pressed into the muddy. Hone was maybe 1.5 feet across, and they formed concentric circles like ripples in water, only they were carved into the ground. The pattern was consistent for about 6 steps, then vanished head near a clump of bushes. There was no drag mark, no sign of a foot or paw lifting, just those perfect round impressions. The spacing between the prints was too long for a person or deer walking. Luna growled softly beside me and stared into the bushes. Prickrick didn't move forward, just stayed frozen watching. It pulled out my flashlight and scanned the underbrush, but the Ewoods looked normal, no branches broken, another footprints, nothing that suggested what made the prints. It felt like something had just hovered above the mud and pressed down in a pattern. Checked the surrounding area. For clues, no tire tracks, newt prints, no animal tracks, intersecting or nearby. The mud was soft enough to catch everything, but these were the only prints. I tried to shake off the weird feeling and figured maybe it was some prank, local kids messing around, using some kind of stencil or mold, but why 6 perfect, evenly spaced circles, and then nothing? I called it over the radio to the station, the dispatcher, to collect photos and samples. So if I could snapped a few pictures with my phone, making sure to get the size. By placing my glove beside it, Luna stayed close, clearly unsettled. Wes stayed by the clearing for another 20 minutes. That's when I noticed something else. The forest around us felt quieter than normal. No birds, no frogs, no crickets. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but like the woods were holding their breath. Then I heard a faint sound, not like wind, more like a low humor. Vibration coming from the direction of the prints. It wasn't steady. It pulsed slowly, almost rhythmic. I looked around, trying to figure out if it was machinery or power lines nearby. But there was nothing but forest in the creek. He wanted to believe it was just my imagination or something natural. But Luna's hackles were up again, and she was growling softly at the same spot. Didn't want to push it so. I grabbed her leash and started back toward the trail. On the way out, I glanced over my shoulder a few times. The prints stayed exactly where they were, undisturbed by wind or ray. That humming sound seemed to fade with distance, but never fully disappeared until we got to the station later that night, after I'd filed their report and was about to turning. I looked at the photos again. The edges of the prints looked too precise, like they'd been made by a perfect moldor machine, no to foot or paw. But if that was true, why noon was around? No vehicle tracks, no tools left behind. Asked some of the other rangers if they'd seen anything like it before. Most said no, though one older guy mentioned a story about strange lights people, reported decades ago north of Park, but no official reports ever came through. Over the next few days, I checked the clearing several times. No new prints, no signs of people or animals. The ground slowly dried and the prints faded, but the mystery stayed with me. Sometimes at night, when I'm alone in the station, I swear I can hear that same faint hum, the one I heard by the prints, just barely there, like something waiting out in the dark woods beyond. The trees. Luna never reacts to it anymore, but I still notice here arse twitch. I don't know what made those tracks or why it left not race beyond those perfect circles in the mud. The whole thing felt like a quiet reminder that there are things out there I just don't understand. Was driving home from work one Tuesday evening. It was late April, and the sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a dull purple-gray. The highway was mostly empty, except for a few cars scattered in the distance. I was about halfway through the tunnel that runs beneath the old river B. And a stretch about 2 miles long, pretty standard, except it always felt a little eerie, like the place where something out of place would show up. I had my phone plugged in and was streaming a podcast, the one I usually listened to during my commute, but the signal was spotty in the tunnels. Oh, it kept cutting in and out. He wasn't paying much attention until I glanced down and noticed my phone's voice memo app had somehow turned on and was recording. I don't remember starting it. The screen was demand. The recording timer showed about 20 seconds. Curious as stopped a recording as soon as I got out of the tunnel. When I played it back, it wasn't just silence or static like I'd expect. Instead, there was a low mechanical humming, steady but faint, like some machine running far off in the distance underneath. That there was a rhythmic tapping, almost like footsteps, but not too regular and deliberate to random noise around. Did several times, the sounds getting under my skin a bit. I couldn't place what it was or where it was coming from. The car was quiet, otherwise no engine noises louder than usual. Another cars close by it. Figured maybe it was just interference from the tunnel itself, or some strange echo bouncing around the walls. But the tapping was too consistent for that. It was like something was tapping on a metal surfaces, low and rhythmic. But I couldn't tell if it was coming from inside the tunnel or somewhere else entirely. After I got home, I listened to the clip again. I didn't want to think about it too much, but the sound was different from anything I'd ever heard on that stretch of road. I checked the phone's settings. No apps running in the background, no reason for the voice memo to turn on by itself. That's when I noticed the timestamp on the file, exactly when I'd been inside the tunnel. Over the next few days, I kept checking my phone's recordings, but nothing else like that happened. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there with me in the tunnel just out of sight one night. It took the same road again, this time without any distractions, just focusing on the drive. As I entered the tunnel, I noticed a faint glow up but had nothing like the usual tunnel lights, which were pale and flickering, but a soft bluish shimmer like light filter. I read through fog it wasn't bright, but it definitely wasn't part of the normal lighting. It blinked, and it was gone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked in the rear view mirror and caught a glimpse of something, maybe a shadow moving along the wall. It was quick, almost like a trick of light, but I was sure, as I would have told myself, it was just my imagination playing tricks in the dim tunnel, but I felt too uneasy. The rest of the drive the next day at work, I asked a coworker if they'd noticed anything strange on that stretch of highway. She laughed it off, but mentioned a couple of drivers had reported weird sounds near the tunnel, metallic noises, odd vibrations in their cars, that kind of thing. Later that week, I was driving through the tunnel again when the voice memo turned on by itself. Once more, I didn't touch the phone this time. The recording was longer, about a minute. When I played it back later, the humming was louder and the tapping had a kind of pattern, almost like Morse code, but garbled and faint. There was also something else, almost musical ringing underneath, like a distant bell or chime. I tried to make sense of it, but got nothing clear. My phone's battery had dropped faster than usual that day too, and the GPS signal was wonky inside the tunnel. I started paying more attention on those drives. I noticed my headlights would flicker for a second as I entered the tunnel, and sometimes the dashboard lights dimmed, then came back once the radio cut out completely, and instead of static, I heard a faint voice whispering, but it was too quiet to catch words. One evening, Luna, my dog, was with me in the car. She usually slept through the ride, but this time she was restless, whining and growling softly as we approached the tunnel entrance. I reached down to calm her, and she suddenly snapped her head toward the back seat. Hackles raised to check behind me, but there was nothing, just the empty back seat and the window reflecting the fading light as we drove through. Luna kept staring out the window, tease if something was there beside us. When I pulled into the driveway later, Luna bolted out of the car and disappeared into the house without looking back that night. I looked at the latest recording from the tunnel. The sound had gotten more complex, layers of humming, tapping, and that soft ringing. But now there was something else, faint, irregular clicking, almost like a code or signal. I'm not sure what to make of it. My phone hasn't recorded anything. Hesitant to drive through that tunnel after dark. No, something's there or was there that I can't explain. The quiet, mechanical noises, the strange lights, Luna's reaction, it all feels connected. I don't know if anyone else ever really notices these things, or if they're just passing them off as glitches or imaginational. I know is that on those drives, especially in that tunnel, the world felt off, like there was something watching or waiting just beyond the edges of what I can see or hear. Tucked my telescope and camera on the back porch around 11 p.m, hoping to catch some good shots of Jupiter and Saturn. I'd been into amateur astronomy for a few years. Nothing fancy, just a solid reflector telescope and a DSLR with a zoom lens attached. My place is out in the country near Ellsworth. The main cities get pretty dark. Usually it's perfect for shooting stars, planets, whatever you want. This night, it was clear and still, the kind of calm that makes you forget everything else. For a while I had my old golden retriever Charlie laying next to me on the porch. He's 10 now, so mostly just snoozing when I'm out stargazing. He was focused on a bright star called Vega. It was high-inch light, you could almost believe was watching back. It got my camera, pointed, adjusted the lens, and started taking some long exposures. After a few minutes, I noticed something weird on the lens at first. I thought it was too typical for this time of year, but it wasn't just a little moisture. The whole lens seemed to fog up. Like I had my breath on it, or it was steaming, except I hadn't touched it to move the camera, and the air was cool, dry. Event the fog thicker over the next few minutes, so much that the star Vega disappeared completely. I was starting to get annoyed, rubbing the lens gently with my sleeve, trying to clear it, but it didn't budge. I put the camera down for a second and checked. Charlie, he was alert now. We were staring off into the woods behind the house. That's unusual for him. He's not one to fixate on nothing. I figured maybe a deer or raccoon was out there. I went back to the camera. The fog on the lens stayed thick for what felt like at least 5 minutes. No breeze, no change in temperature, just that creeping haze is sitting on the glass. Checked the camera settings, everything normal. Then, without warning, the fog vanished. I blinked and looked through the viewfinder. Vega was back, but the star didn't look right. Instead of a sharp pinpoint, it had this strange shape like a blurry flare stretched out sideways. But there was another light source nearby that could cause lens flare. It was soft, but definitely distorted like a smudge, except it wasn't on the lens anymore. It tried adjusting focus, zooming in out, but the shape stayed the same every other star around. Vega looked normal, small points of light, no distortion. Vega was different. Curious is which to live view on the camera screen and zoom. Dine on the start, the shape looked even weirder, kind of like a crescent with a faint tail trailing off to one side. It reminded me of one of those weird light reflections you see on car windows sometimes, but there was nothing around that could reflect anything. This way, it took a few pictures hoping it was a camera glitch. The images saved fine, but when I zoomed in later on the laptop, the star was the same distorted shape it tried to recreate the effect with the camera, pointed at their bright stars on different nights. But nothing came close just that one night on that one star. Hyleth this wash happening, Charlie kept growling low and quiet, his eyes fixed on the tree, and again, I felt a little uneasy. But when I looked, there was nothing moving, no animals, no lights, no sounds, except the faint rustling of leaves after maybe 20 minutes. The strange shape started to fade as slowly went back to its usual crisp dot in the sky. And the lens was completely clear, packed everything up, and took Charlie inside. He refused to settle for a while, pacing and winning, which he never does after being outside. To check the photos again on my computer and Redat that weird star shape. I couldn't figure out what caused it. No camera apps I use have glitches like that. Now other reports mentioned anything unusual, no fog, no strange atmospheric disturbances for the next few days. I kept checking the sky, the weather, and my equipment. Nothing repeated the night. Sky looked normal. My camera worked fine. And Charlie acted like his usual lazy self. I'm still not sure what happened with that lens fog. In that distorted star shape, I've shown the pictures to a few local astronomy friends. Some said maybe it was a weird atmospheric effect, maybe a reflection of a satellite or plane lights, but none of them could explain the lens fogging or the shape that didn't move or change like any lens flare or reflection should most nights since then. I've felt like something's watching me from the woods while I'm out there just beyond the porch light. It's never close or obvious, just there. And sometimes when I look back at those photos, I think maybe I caught a glimpse of whatever it was, something not right. Something that didn't belong, but in the end, it's just a star, a fogged up lens, and a restless dog nothing mo. Nothingless the first time. I noticed it was just after midnight, heading out for a smoke break from my office on the 15th floor of the Granite Tower. Downtown, the building's glass facade wraps around like a mirror, reflecting the whole block, the streetlights, and the city's faint fume at night. He was standing near the windows on the east side, just trying to catch some fresh air and shake off the tension from a long day when some Ething caught my eye. It was a shape hard to describe, not solid, but not transparent. Either like a shadow with edges too sharp to be just a trick of light, and yet somehow not completely there. It hovered in their reflection just outside the building, maybe 50 feet from the street behind the parking lot. At first, it thought it was a person, maybe a homeless guy or ralet night worker. But when I blinked and looked again, the shape didn't move, and it didn't seem human. It was tall and thin, but its outline was jagged, almost like a distorted triangle, or some kind of cloak billowing. In a wind that wasn't there, I pinched my eyes and looked back to the actual street. Nothing new, just the usual empty lot with a few scattered trash cans and a flickering street lamp. I thought maybe I was tired, so I shrugged it off and went back inside the next night, same time, same place. I caught again the shape was still there in roughly the same spot. I called it out quietly to my coworker, Jamie, who was at the next windows smoking a cigarette. "To a do you see that?" asked, pointing at the glass. James squinted, shaking her head. "See what the shape over there," and nodded toward T. Here, reflection. Jamie leaned closer, but just saw the empty lot. "Don't see anything." I looked again, and sure enough, the shape was gone. It wasn't exactly scary at that point, just weird. I figured maybe some sort of weird light play or a bug on the glass. But it kept showing up every night, always in that same spot, not moving, never blinking or changing shape. Much after a few nights, it tried to take a photo on my phone, but every time I raised the camera, the shape disappeared right before I could snap the shot. Is where I could see it. 1 second, turn the phone, and it was gone like it's. Hence the camera started timing my breaks carefully, watching the windows of the nearby buildings in the reflection. Nothing else ever showed up, just that one shape. It was mostly visible on clear nights, never when it was raining or foggy. One night, I stayed late after everyone left. The building was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioning and my own footsteps on the carpet. I watched their reflection for almost an hour. The shape remained steady, a faint dark figure against the lighter glow of the city. At one point, it looked like it tilted its head, almost like it would. As watching me felt cold all of a sudden, which was odd, because it was a warm night and the windows were closed. I thought about calling security or the front desk, but I wasn't sure what I'd say that night. When I left the office, the shape was gone. The lot was still empty, and the street lamp was flickering worse than usual. It told a few other coworkers over the next week, trying to get them to come out for a look. Some humored me, but none saw it. One even joked I was losing it. The weirdest part was how the shape interacted with the environment. In their reflection one night, a card row. V passed the lot. The shape didn't move, but seemed to block the car's reflection for a split second, like it was there physically. Even thought the street was empty. One evening, I stayed past midnight again and brought my phone with me to record a video. Held it steady and aimed at the reflection. The shape appeared about halfway through, dark and motionless, But every time I looked at the playback later, the shape was just a blur, like a smudge of shadow that flickered and vanished. I started feeling one jeet work, like the shape was waiting for me or watching from the other side. Off the glass, I kept checking my phone for messages or calls, but found none, and noon else seemed to notice anything unusual one night. A security guard named Lester caught me staring out the window for what had to be the 10th time in an hour. "You see something?" he asked, nodding at the glass. "Yeah, something," I said, swallowing hard. "There's this shape just out there, like a shadow, but it doesn't belong." Lester shrugged. "Maybe it's just a trick of the lights. This building can mess with your head sometimes." I wanted to agree, but I wasn't convinced. The next week, I started keeping a notebook to jot down what is a wetch night. The shape was always there. On clear nights, sometimes clearer, sometimes faint. It never moved, never changed. But once as where it seemed to step forward in the reflection. As if inching closer, I checked with the building management about cameras outside. They said there were a few, but none aimed toward the parking lot, just in trances and walkways one night. I brought my dog, a border collie mix named Juno, with me to the office loading dock area outside after hours. Wanted to see if maybe the shape was actually outside the building. Juno was quiet, ears perked, staring at the same spot. I always watched from inside, is hound a flashlight around the empty lot. Nothing but graveland trash, no sign of anything, no footprints, no disturbed grass. But Juno kept growling low and backing away from the direction of the shape's usual spot. That was when I noticed a low humming sound just below range, vibrating through the air. It wasn't from the building or nearby traffic. It came and went, subtle, but steady. I didn't stay long, it called. Juno back and headed inside after that night. I avoided the windows as much as I could. The shape kept showing, though it never disappeared for long always. The resident watching from the glass one late night. I left the office feeling exhausted. As I walked down the street, I glanced back at the building's facade. The shape was there again, but this time it wasn't alone. There were faint outlines of two more shapes, smaller, hovering just behind the first. As topped cold heart thud-udding. But when I blinked, they vanished. I don't know what eyes or were, if it was just some trick my mind played on me after too many late nights and long shifts. But every time I pass by that building now, I feel like I'm being watched through the glass by something that's there but never there, and I can't explain it. It happened 2 years ago. Mid-September out near Bell Hollow in Nebraska. Used to live in Omaha. But after I hit 30, I moved out to the edge of, now we're rented a small house on a couple acres of land just outside town. Still worked remote for the same logistics company. But the quiet helped me stays an errand every day, sometimes just a few miles, sometimes a full 30. And if my legs shattered, lick to start late, less sun, less traffic, more time to think. The moon wash high and bright that night, almost full, cool air, dry ground. Now when there's this stretch behind my house, a dirt road that cuts through old farmland. Most of its flat fields overgrown with weeds, some busted up fences, rusting irrigation rigs, noon uses anymore. My usual loop took me down county line around 2 old silos and back along a narrow path next to the creek. I brought my headlamp, but barely used it. Moonlight lit everything up just fine. About 3 min. I stopped to stree. Etch near the break in the fence, where the trail hits the open field. I remember I could hear the crickets, distant dogs, even a barn owl somewhere off to my left. I remember how clear the air smelled. I remember noticing how quiet it was, but not in a weird way, just peaceful. He was jogging again, slow and steady. When I caught it, it moved left to right across the field, maybe 100 yards ahead, something long and narrow like a dark ripple at first. I thought it was a deer or a coyote, but the way it moved didn't make sense. It didn't leap or bound or walk, it glided like it was skimming the surface of the grass, and fast, way too fast. It covered maybe 65th in a couple seconds and vanished behind a thicket of scrub brush near the far fence line. His top pulled my earbuds out. Nothing, no sound, no rustling, not even a single blade of grass bent in the direction it mo. Vetty waited for maybe 10 seconds, squinting hard. My eyes were adjusted to the moonlights, so I could see pretty far. But whatever it was didn't come out again. It hold myself. It was probably a bird or some weird optical thing, maybe a shadow from a plane overhead. Even looked up half, expecting to see blinking lights. But the sky was completely empty, just stars and the moon. It picked up my pace a little after that, not because I was scared exactly, more just keep like something in my brain didn't want. Me standing still, looped past the silos and came back around to the trail behind my place. That whole section follows the creek for maybe half a mile, and there's trees on both sides. So usually it's peaceful that night. I kept checking over my shoulder. He wasn't airing anything, no branches breaking, no footsteps, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off right before I hit my driveway. Is a wid again, same shape, same motion this time, farther out across the creek. It moved against the direction of the water, fast and smooth, like someone dragging a black tarp through the grass, only the tarp had no edges and didn't make a sound to stew. peed running and just stared at where it had gone. The hairs on my arms were standing up. It didn't feel cold, just suddenly aware of every noise or lack of noise around me. Walked the last stretch home and locked the door behind me, which I almost never did. Unless I left town, my dog, a scruffy mute named Cray, was waiting inside. Like usual, didn't bark, didn't pace, just stood at the door with his ears up tail-oa. I crouched and scratched his neck and he leaned into me, like he wanted to hide behind me the next night. It took the same road, not because I was trying to prove something. I think part of me just didn't want to give in to whatever weirdness that had been. I left earlier than usual this time, a little before sunset. I told myself I wanted the extra light, but I think I just didn't want to be out there in full dark. The whole run was normal until I hit the field again. I paused at the same break in the fence. Nothing moved, no shadows, but Cray, who I'd brought with me, that time started whining and tugging at the leash. He's usually calm, as anything doesn't even bark at deer, but who wanted nothing to do with that field. He stopped walking entirely when we're Ched the edge, planting his feet and pulling toward the road. It knelt down and tried to soothe him, but the just kept staring into the middle of the field. His ears were down, his whole body stiff. He wouldn't stop staring. I looked too. I didn't see anything, but my skin prickled, not like I was being watched, more like I was too visible, like standing on a stage in front of an audience. I couldn't see, gave in, and we turned around, ran to loop backward. Craig relaxed. As soon as we were back under trees a few days later, I mentioned it to Evan, my neighbor across the road. He's ex-Navy, pretty rational guy, spends most of his time fishing or rebuilding old motors. I just asked if he'd ever seen anything weird out by the old McCall field. He shrugged and said, "Couple nights last year is all light shovering over that ridge. Figured it was a drone or some weather thing." Asked what kind of lights. He said white, didn't blink, just sat there silent. Didn't elaborate, and I didn't push that same night around 11. It took Cray out back for a pee. There's no street lights out. The reso, everything was dark except for the porch light, and the moon has nipped around like usual, leaned on the railing watching the tree line. Then he stopped and growled low and quiet, not at anything specific, just facing the direction of the field. Again, as can the horizon, still nothing. But I remember this tight feeling in my gut, like being pulled forward, almost like vertigo, but horizontal. I went cold, a lover, and for no reason I could name. I reached down and picked Cray up. He snowed, a small dog, but it carried him inside and shut the door behind us. That was the last time I ran that path that night, kept to the road after that, or went out in the mornings instead. I didn't see the shape again, but sometimes on clear nights, I'd get that same weird feeling, like being too exposed, like something knew where I was. I never saw it up close, I never heard a sound. But every time I think about how fast it moved, how it didn't displace the grass or make wind or even spook the birds, I feel wrong, like something broke a rule I didn't know existed, and I still don't know what it Wasi was out in Lake Winfield late one Saturday night, like I did most weekends. I usually liked it because the water was quiet and the stars were out, and the only light came from my little boat lantern and the occasional flicker of fireflies along the shore. The wind was calm, the air a little chilly, but not enough to make me uncomfortable. I had my dog, Benny, curled up at my feet. There's a border collie mix, always calm at the water, unless a fish splashes close, like around midnight. I was sitting back reeling in a line when something caught my eye and noticed a cluster of pale light shovering just above the lake's surface, maybe 20 or 30 feet away from the boat. They were kind of soft and diffuse, not like any boat lights or lanterns I'd ever seen, and they didn't reflect in the water. That's the first thing that really threw me off. Normally, any light close to the water would reflect. These didn't. It was like the lake just swallowed their reflections whole. The lights didn't move with the wind. Either the water was barely rippling and the breeze was steady, but those lights just stayed put in the exact same spot. I blinked a few times, then King, maybe my eyes were messing with me, or it was some kind of optical illusion. Benny stirred a little, lifting his head and growling softly at the lights, which was weird, because he's usually pretty chill, unless there's a bird or a raccoon nearby. I called out to the lights, half joking, "Hey, you folks, lost or something?" No answer, of course. They just stayed the rest steady and unblinking. The color was a pale blue-white, kind of eerie, but not harsh like glow sticks left out too long, or maybe some weird bioluminescent bug, but way too big and steady for that. I thought about paddling closer to check them out, but something about those lights felt off, not threatening exactly, just wrong in a way. I couldn't explain, like they were watching, but didn't want to be found. I grabbed my phone to take a video, but it was dead, battery drained. I hadn't used it much that days. That didn't make sense either. I figured no big dealy. Get a better look tomorrow during the day. Maybe the lights were some kind of stranger reflection or some prank. Still, Benny Waston sea eyes locked on the lights after a few minutes. I noticed something else. The water around the lights wasn't right. Normally, even on a still night, you'd see the faintest ripple from something hovering that close to the surface. But this part of the lake was dead. calm like the water was being held still under those lights, almost like a silent bubble. I thought it might be imagining things, so I started talking to Benny, too. Distract myself, maybe it's some weird fishing buoy sort those flares that float, but no buoys make lights that steady or pale. And I knew flares would drift with the wind. Then after maybe 10 or 15 minutes, the lights suddenly dimmed like someone was turning down, a dimmer switch slowly. They didn't blink out suddenly or shoot away. They just faded until they disappeared completely. The lake was just dark again. Benny relaxed and lay back down, his app for a long time staring at the spot where the lights had been feeling cold event, but the air was mealed on. Hurried back to the dock. I kept looking over my shoulder half, expecting to see the lights again, but not. Hing showed up. The rest of the night was normal, quiet, dark, with only the usual night sounds of water lapping and frogs squalling the next day. I talked to some of the other fishermen around town. Nobody mentioned seeing anything like that, no strange lights or unusual calm patches on the lake. It tried to check my phone's battery history to see if there was an explanation for it dying. So suddenly, but everything looked normal, like its hood have had at least 30 cents left. Since then, I haven't been back out at night on the lake alone. Benny and is still God during the day, but that spot where the light shivered, I avoid it. The whole thing doesn't make much sense to me, and that's what messes with me the most. Something was there that night, just out of reach, quiet and still like a secrecy. I'm not sure if it was natural or something else, but it wasn't any fishing light or boat I've ever seen. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but Benny's still wary around that part of the lake. He doesn't like being near the water's edge after dark, and he's never been like that before. That's all I really know. The night was quiet, too quiet really for the kind of J. Ubby had at the Ridgeview weather station. I was the night tech, basically just me, few computers and a bunch of instruments on this remote hill overlooking the Shenandoah Valley. The station was about as isolated as you could get without being in the middle of nowhere, maybe 2 miles from the nearest road, surrounded by forest and fields that stretched down toward the town of Madison. I'd worked the night shift there for 6 months, and mostly it was just me staring at radar screens and checking data logs, recording whatever weird weather passed through like. A solitude. Honestly, my dog, Tucker, a black lab with a white patch on his chest, came with me on these shift. It's mostly because my apartment at home wasn't dog-friendly. Tucker was curled up on the floor next to the control desk that night, snoring softly when the instrument suddenly started acting up. Was watching the usual readings, wind speed, humidity, atmospheric pressure, when my monitor flickered. Then a high-pitched buzzing sound filled the room for a second before cutting out. The electromagnetic sensor was showing a sharp spike, one of those massive jumps. Expect with a thunderstorm or solar flare. The thing was, the sky outside was perfectly clear, no clouds anywhere. Now in note, even a stray leaf moving in the trees beyond the window. Tucker perked up, ears twitching, but didn't bark. He got up and looked out. The moon was full and bright, lighting up the trees and the empty field behind the station. Like daytime, no lightning, no planes, no satellites overhead. Nothing to explain the spike. I checked the instruments again, still the same jumpy EM activity, like something had surged through the atmosphere. But I couldn't see or hear anything unusual. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was a glitch in the equipment. These old sensors sometimes gave false alarms, especially when the temperature dropped at night. But then the weirdness started layering on. About 10 minutes after the spike, Tucker suddenly stood up and started growling low and steady, staring out the big window that faced the forest line. It followed his gaze, but saw nothing. No animals, no movement, just black trees and moonlight. It told him to calm down, but it wouldn't stop. He kept growling, hackles raised, teeth bared, nada. Aggressive, exactly, more like alert, warning. Something was off. I moved closer, resting my hand on his back, but the feeling of unease was already creeping into my chest. Then the lights in the control room dimmed briefly, like someone flipped a switch for a second. The computers didn't reboot or lose power, but the monitors flickered again. Is where I heard a faint thum in the air, almost like static, but it wasn't coming from the machines. It was too low. Too steady. Pulled up the security cameras on the screens. Sun pointed at the station's perimeter. The other scanning the edge of the woods about 100 yards away. Both showed nothing unusual, no vehicles, no people, no animals. So walked outside with a flashlight, and Tucker tagging along, still tense but quieter. Now the air was cold and crisp, and the stars stretched clear above his can the tree, and he carefully shining the beam through the branches. Nothing moved, no strange lights or shapes, no noise, except the wind rustling leaves far off. I stayed out there for about 10 minutes, turning slowly in a circle, eyes peeled for anything out of place. When I went back inside, the spike on the EM sensor was gone, but a low-level humming heard in the background, almost like a vibration you could feel in your bones. It tried calling my supervisor in Madison, but the radio link was crackling with static and eventually cut out. Is which to my cell phone, no signal. The station's a tonnerage between hills and dense forest. The cell tower was miles away. Oh, I wasn't surprised. Still, it made me feel more isolated than usual, like peptane eye on the data. Feed nothing else abnormal happened for the rest of my shift. But the feeling didn't leave me. Tucker wouldn't settle down, depacing the floor, and occasionally growling softly at the window. Every soof in the lights dimmed a little or flickered like the building itself was breathing when the sun started to rise. I was relieved to pack up my gear and hooked Tucker's leash to the station door on the way down the dirt path to the truck. I looked back once more at the weather station. The instruments were quiet. Now the forest behind it seemed normal in the morning light. But as I was driving home, I glanced up at the sky and caught something moving in the corner of my eye, a faint glow drifting silently just above the treetops. So it wasn't like a plane or helicopter. It moved too smoothly without sound or blinking lights. So blinked, and it was gone. When I got home, I let Tucker out into the backyard. He seemed tired, but okay, like he had no idea what he'd been barking about all night as it on the porch for a while, watching the early morning sky, wondering what the hell had happened up on that hill. I still don't know. The instruments caught something, real enough to disrupt the sensors and mess with the power, but nothing that anyone could see an obvious source. No explanation. Tucker hasn't acted strange since. Neither have I really, just this quiet, unsettled feeling that maybe whatever it was is still out there somewhere, beyond the trees, waiting or watching. And sometimes when I'm alone at night is where I heard that low hum again, just faint enough to make the silence feel wrong. It was one of those evenings in early October where the air feels sharp but not cold, and the sky clear enough that you can see all the stars. Starting Tapoka through, was out on my bike, just usual solo ride on a quiet country road near where I live in western Pennsylvania. Nothing fancy, just trying to clear my head after a long day at work. The road it take is mostly straight, maybe a few bends sheer, and they're lined with thick woods on either side. The trees were just starting to lose their leaves. So there was a little rustling from the breeze, but not much, else I had my earbuds out, because I like to hearth the wind and the tires on the pavement, but I wasn't blasting music or anything, just enough volume to keep the silent. Set from getting too loud was about 3 min going steady, when I noticed something weird out of the corner of my eye, a shadow just beyond the tree, and it may be 20 or 30 feet off the road. At first, it thought it might be an animal, maybe a deer or something, but it didn't act right. It stayed just at the edge, always matching my pace, like it was keeping up with me, but not stepping into the road or making a noise as low down all it. Till thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me. That's when I realized the shadow wasn't a deer or any animal. I'd never seen. It was tall and lanky, but there were no clear features, by just this dark shape that shifted subtly with the movement of the trees. It wasn't running or walking, more like it glided or floated along perfectly in sync with my speed. Tried to look directly at it a few times, but every time I did, it kind of blended back into the trees or disappeared behind branches. The sun was low, so the shadows were long, and maybe it was just some trick of light, but my gut said otherwise. It felt deliberate. It checked behind me couple times to light, but there was no sign of anyone else on the road or any car, just fading light, and that thing in the woods. I thought about turning around, but the road was narrow and I didn't want to stop completely. I kept pedaling, but slower now, trying to see if it would do something else. Then the weird part started. The shadow didn't just stay next to me anymore. It started to mimic my exact movements. If it sped up, it sped up. If it slowed, it slowed. When I veered a bit to the left, it moved with mealways just on the edge. G off the tree, and I felt my heart speed up. But I told myself it was probably some kind of animal or even a person hiding. Thought that made less sense the more I thought about it. Who would follow someone silently, just matching their pace, never stepping into view or look the trees closely. Movement besides the shadow, no sound, except the wind in my tires. Even called out once, just, "Hey, who's there?" But no reply. The shadow stayed where it was. About a mile later, the road started to open up into farmland. The trees thinned out, and the shadow stayed behind the last line of woods. Is lowered to a stop, breathing hard, and glanced back one last time. Nothing. No sign of it. Kept going toward home, still shaken, but trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. When I got back to my place, I told my roommate Sarah about it. She shrugged and said maybe it was a trick of the light or some deer in the brush. That night I couldn't sleep at picturing that shadow, how it moved perfectly with me. I even wondered if I'd lost some time or if it had been following me for longer than. I thought the next day I went back to the same stretch of road during daylight. I looked for footprints or anything out of place near the tree. Knew where the shadow had been. There was nothing. No prints, no signs of a person or animal, just the usual leaves and dirty. Told a few friends, but none had any explanation. Some joked it was a ghost or a government experiment, but none of that sat right with me. It didn't feel like anything paranormal or sci-fi, just something that didn't belong. Moving alongside me insolence. A couple of nights later, it riding the same road again, hoping maybe I'd see it again or for what it was, but nothing showed up. No shadow and a strange feeling I still think about it. Sometimes I'm not sure. If it was some kind of animal with crazy camouflage or something else, it never tried to hurt me or come closer, just watched and followed. I haven't told many people because it sounds crazy, but it happened, and I can't explain it. The shadow on the edge of the foe. Ood's keeping pace with me like it was part of the road itself. He was 16, just some kid messing around with my phone on the 4th of July. We lived in a small town in central Ohio. Nothing fancy, just wide streets, a few parks, and a lot of open sky. At night was warm and typical summer stuff. He was outside with my little sister, June, and our dog, a scruffy mutt named Huckleberry. June was watching the fireworks from the porch swing while I was trying to get a good video of them with my phone. I didn't really expect anything special, just the usual pops and colors. So I remember this. Sky was mostly clear, a few thin clouds drift. Ting by the fireworks were going off one after another. And I was holding my phone up recording. He wasn't even paying that much attention, because honestly fireworks get old after a while. Right, but then in the middle of one of the bigger bursts, I caught something weird in the frame, a small, bright or blood-glowing dot moving fast across the sky. Behind the fireworks at first, I thought it was just a plane or maybe a drone, but it moved way too quickly and too sharply. I mean, it wasn't like a smooth or corny thing. It zipped along, then suddenly changed direction. At these crazy, sharp angles like 90 degrees or more, it didn't just curve, it snapped left, then straight, then diagonally down. Again, it was almost like it was darting around, but no blinking lights like a plane or a drone. Just this solid bright white orb froze for a second, staring at my phone screen. Because I couldn't believe what I was seeing, Huckleberry started barking at something, looking up to all tense. June noticed it too, and got off the swing, shading her eyes to see better. But the orb wasn't making any sound at all. No drone buzz, no engines, no thing, just this silent ball of light weaving through the clouds. Then just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished like it zipped up into the clouds and was gone. No ding out, no blinking, just nothing. The clouds were thick enough to cover it, but as where it moved in a way, non-normal aircraft could have stopped recording after that, because I was kind of freaked out. We talked about it, June, and it trying to figure out if we both saw the same thing. She said it looked like a firefly, but way too big and way too fast. Huckleberry stayed on alert, sniffing the air and growling low for a while. After a few minutes, she calmed down, but it couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next day, I showed the video to my friend Carter. He's into all that weird stuff, conspiracy theories, UFO videos, you name it. Slowed the video down and zoomed in, and yeah, the orb was definitely there, and of flickering, no blinking navigation lights. Just this glowing sphere, moving impossible angles across the sky. Carter said it looked like nothing he'd ever seen from a drone or plane. That's when things got stranger. The night after the fireworks, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, but I kept the eye. Beneath these weird clicking sounds outside, like a quiet mechanical tapping or rhythm coming from the woods behind our house. It wasn't normal animal noises, and it definitely wasn't human. I grabbed my flashlight and looked outside, but there was nothing there. The woods were just shadows and quiet, except for that clicking. The next couple of nights, the clicking came again, always around the same time. Just after midnight, asked my parents if they heard it, but they said no. June said she noticed a strange light near the tree in one night, just a faint glow, nothing like the orb from before. She thought maybe it was a neighbor with a flashlight. He wasn't so sure. I went out a few times with Huckleberry trying to catch whatever it was making those noises, but we never found anything. The woods felt wrong, like there was something watching but not close enough to see. The none afternoon, I was walking home from school and noticed something odd on the sidewalk near our street. These tiny, perfectly round patches where the grass was dead, like little circles, maybe 3 in wide, buffed, spaced out randomly across the front lawns of about 4 houses. And they didn't look like burn marks or chemicals, just dead spots. Noon seemed to notice or care. It tried to take a picture, but when I looked at the photo later, the spots were blurry and sort of glowing faintly like a soft white haze over them. When I showed the picture to June, she said, "That's creepy," and then changed the subject. I couldn't explain any of it. The orb, the clicking, the dead patches. It was like something invisible was poking around our neighborhood. One night, a few days later, I was laying in bed and noticed the power flicker. The lights dimmed for a few seconds, then came back on. It tapped to check the circuit breaker, but everything looked normal. Then I heard a low hum outside, almost like an electrical hum, but deeper and vibrating through the ground. I peeked out my window and saw a faint glow in the sky behind the trees. It wasn't the orb from before, but a wider pulsing light, almost like it was breathing. It blinked, and it was gone. That night, I didn't sleep well, like Pep. Hearing those clicks again, this time closer, almost like something tapping on the side of the house. I told my parents about it the next morning, but they just shrugged it off, said it was probably a woodpecker or branches shitting the house in the windy. Wasn't convinced. The woods behind us were dense and quiet. He'd been there plenty of times and never saw a woodpecker that close. and the tapping was too steady and mechanical. The strangest thing happened a week after the fireworks. Our whole neighborhood had power flickers, all at once lights dimming, for exactly 17s. Econs, then back to normal. It wasn't just use. Ither found out later that every house's camera froze. During that blackout, for exactly 7 seconds, someone online posted a clip from one of the cameras. And every single one, there was the same bright dot in the sky, not moving, just hanging there. The exact same spot. That was weird because as far as I know, there's no star or satellite that stays fixed like that. It didn't blink or move when the cameras came back on the dot. Was gone. I kept thinking about that orb from the fireworks. Could it have been the same thing? Or something related. After that blackout, the clicking stopped, the dead grass patches didn't get any bigger or multiply, and the strange glowing in the woods vanished. But every now and then, when I'm outside at night, I get this feeling like something's watching from just beyond the trees, like it's waiting to still watch the sky when it's clear, hoping to catch that orb again or anything like it. I'm not sure what it was or if anyone else saw it, but it stuck with me. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there somewhere, just hiding in plain sight. It started with the power cut. In gout, just a quick blackout, nothing unusual for late summer storms in Cedar Ridge, the neighborhood where I live. But what came after was anything but normal. I was sitting on my porch around 9:50 p.m., just drinking a beer and watching my Gawire little terrier named Sprocket chase moths in the porch light. We'd had a thunderstorm roll through earlier, so the air was thick and humid, with the smell of wet grass and ozone hanging around. Then without warning, all the lights flickered and went dead. The whole block went dark at once. The street lamps, porch lights, everything. I figured it was just the storm messing with the grid again. I pulled out my phone to check if anyone else had posted about it, but my screen went black too. No service happened. About 17 seconds later, the power snapped back on. But in noticed the porch cameras, the little motion activated security cams all around the neighborhood. Their feeds were frozen, every single one of them, like the exact same moment, was paused. Every camera across the block. I'm noting to conspiracy stuff, but that was the first thing that felt off. How old the camera saw freeze at the same time. Then they all unfroze exactly 17 seconds later. I realized this because I was watching a live feed on from my buddy Jenna's porch cams. She's a techner, has a dozen cameras around her house, and it suddenly started playing again, showing this bright white dot hanging in the sky right above the old church steeple on Main Street. I grabbed my binoculars from inside the cheap pair I use for hiking and looked up. The dot didn't move. It was just there, hovering. And blinked. And for a second, the dot seemed to shimmer like the heath haze you see of asphalt in the summer. But this was the middle of the night. It didn't change position or size. It just stayed perfectly still, reflecting the streetlights and stars around it. But wrong, like a funhouse mirror reflection that didn't match the sky. Beautiful. Jenna, she picked up on the scandring, sounding confused. Did you see that all the cams froze for like 7 seconds, then came back with that dot right there? Watching it, yeah, she said, voice low. Same here. Every camera around here showed the same thing, same spot. I don't know why Webb thought to check the cameras, just some neighborhood habit. But it was strange how synced everything was. He escaped. If she was going outside, she said she was too spooked. He stepped off the porch. Sprocket followed, Nosa twitching ears back like he was picking up on something. The night was silent, except for the distant hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. Oddly late for that time, the dot stayed right where it was. I walked toward the church. Key. Ping my's locked on it. The sky was cloudy, but the clouds weren't moving, almost like time's load as where felt the aviar thicker. Somehow Sprocket kept glancing up, but wouldn't bark or grow lip. Pulled out my phone again to try and take a picture, but the camera just kept focusing and refocusing, never locking in the dot. Shimmer red, more than flickering on the edge of visibility. A car drove past and its headlights flashed on the dot for a second. The way the light bounced off, if it wasn't normal, like it wasn't reflecting the way something solid would, more like a thin sheet. Foil on water, moving and rippling in ways that didn't line up with the car's motion. Then I noticed my neighbor, Miss Lark, standing in her front yard. She was staring up at the dot, too frozen in place, her mouth slightly open, like she couldn't process what she was seeing. I waved at her, and she blinked, then looked down, like she suddenly snapped out of it. We didn't say anything to each other. The weirdness was heavy in the air, and I think we both felt it was better to just watch and wait. After a few minutes, the dot slowly started to fade, not like it flew away or anything like it drew. Got dimmer, like a star disappearing behind clouds. But the clouds were still clear, and then it was gone. I looked around. The street was back to normal. The porch lights buzzed, street lamps glowed. Yellow Sprocket stopped staring up and started sniffing the grass again like nothing had happened. That's when I noticed the time on my phone, or at least what the screen said. It was 9:49 p.m. Except I had been watching the dot for almost 30 minutes. Something about the timing didn't add up. I was certain I'd been outside, maybe 15-minute stops, but the sea. Lock had jumped almost 20 minutes while I was looking at that thing. I don't know how that happened. My phone didn't reboot or anything, and the other clocks around the house still matched. I texted Jenna again, asking her what time it was there. She said 9 feet the clocks were fine, but if I hadn't lost track of time, which I didn't, then something weird was going on with the time itself. The next day, I checked the porch cams. The footage showed the blackout, the freeze. Then the dot appearing in the exact same spot, visible on every camera around the neighborhood. The strange thing was that all the videos had the same glitch. The footage froze for exactly 7 seconds. Then the bright dot was there, unblinking, unchanging, before fading out. It tried to compare it to any known satellite or drone, or even fireworks. Nothing matched. The more I looked into it, the more strange little details came up. The dot never made noise, no even a hum, no drones or planes flew nearby, no searchlights or police activity, and everyone in the neighborhood had the same blackout and camera freeze. The weirdest part was that Noon wanted to talk about it. A few neighbors mentioned the blackout but shrugged off the camera glitch, and the light, one guy said it was probably a glitch in the power grid, but none of us could explain how the light showed up so clearly on all the different cameras facing different directions. I asked Mrs. Lark if she said no, but she admitted she'd felt really anxious that night, like someone was watching. I kept thinking about that dot, how it reflected the stars wrong, shimmer red like heath haze, and somehow made time feels lower and the clocks not matching. I can't say what it was, maybe a strange atmospheric thing, maybe a trick of the light, or something else, but I know what is when I know it wasn't normal. Sprocket won't gone off the porch light since that night. And I find myself double-checking the cameras every night, hoping not to see that same frozen moment again. Was staying in this tinny cabin right on the edge of the Oregon coast, out near Cape Perpetuate. Was early October, and the weather had been all over the place. A rain, wind, thin clear skies that felt almost cold enough to bite. It was there mostly to get away. Clearwork had been stressful, and the ocean always helped with that. I had this old pair of binoculars in the cabin, kind of a dusty, scratched-up thing that belonged to the previous owner. It wasn't really using them for anything, just fiddling with the mud, night trying to see how far out I could spot ships or whales or whatever. It was around 11:30 p.m. Man, the sky was really clear, the kind of night where the stars look like they're stuck on some black velvet backdrop. Up the ocean was calm, just this gentle dark stretch with waves barely rolling as it on the porch. The binoculars in my lap wrapped in a blanket, because the fog had started to rolling, but not thick yet, more like a damp mist hanging close to the ground. Was scanning the horizon, looking out past the headlands where the water just goes on forever. Then something caught my eye, not right away at first. I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from the moon or a passing ship. But it didn't move like a ship, and there was no sound. I raised the binoculars and focused and the spot maybe a mile or south, just above the surface of the water. There was a shape there, hard to describe exactly. It looked like a faint shimmering outline, hovering just above the waves, not a solid thing. It reminded me of heath haze on a hot road, how the air looks like. It looks like it's bending. But this was above the ocean on a cool night. The shape was dark against the sky, but also kind of translucent fright. And when I looked away and back again through the binoculars, it seemed to flicker in and out of view. I blinked a few times, checked the focus on the binocular and adjusted the lens to see if maybe the glass was fogging up or something. But it stayed there shimmering. The weird part was how it reflected the stars. Normally everything out on the ocean just swallows the light. But this shape somehow caught the stars differently, like the stars were bending around, or getting distorted. But not just a blur, a subtle twist, like the pattern of the stars shifted, ever so slightly inside the shape. I lowered the binoculars and looked with my naked eyes. Nothing, just the dark ocean and a sky full of stars. But when I put the binoculars back, this shape was there again, flickering like it was struggling to stay visible. It hot, maybe I was imagining it, tore it was some kind of mirage or reflection from the cabin windows. But I had already closed the window to my right, and the porch light was off. No other lights are around, except the stars and a faint glow from the lighthouse. Farther down the coast, that light was steady and yellowish, and this shape didn't flash or move like it is at there for maybe 20 minutes. Just watching, the fog started to thicken and the shape got harder to see. But I kept the binocular strained in its direction. The knit got stranger at one point. The binoculars slipped a little in my hands, and when I refocused, the shape was gone, not just out of view, completely gone. Scanned the whole horizon, moving the binoculars left and right, but nothing, just the regular dark ocean. Then I noticed something else. The sound of the ocean changed. It wasn't the usual gentle crash of waves on the rocks. It was quieter, almost muffled, like a heavy blanket had been thrown over everything. I strained to listen, and that's when I heard it, a low, steady hum, not from the ocean or the wind, but coming from the direction where the shape had been. I put the binoculars down and looked up at the skynoplanes or helicopters flying by no distant ships. See there, the hum was steady, but it wasn't loud, more like something vibrating in the air just on the edge of hearing. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. It called my dog, Calamixed Husky with sharp eyes, who'd been laying next to him on the porch. Hepper Cadupin stood ears forward, nose twitching, has stared out toward the water-low growl starting in his throat, which was unusual because he's usually calm at night. He went inside to grab my phone and check the time. 11:55 p. and no missed calls or messages, no strange notifications. It put on a jacket and stepped off the porch, trying to see if I could hear the hum better. The wind was picking up now and the fog had gotten thick enough that I couldn't see the water from the porch anymore. I walked down the small path to the cliff near by the ocean was barely vis. Ebla just a dark blur beyond the white spray of the waves. Shitting the rocks below, the hum was gone. I looked back toward the porch, and for a moment the fog seemed to move faster than the wind. It felt like the night was closing in tighter, like I was being watched, but I couldn't find any movement in the shadows. I headed back inside and sat down trying to shake off the feeling. Cal jumped upon me lapin, and is scratched behind his ears, but he was still alert, eyes darting toward the windows. I kept the binoculars nearby, but I didn't want to look outside again. He was tired, but I couldn't sleep. The air felt the AV like something was pressing down around 1 a.m. I heard the humming again. It was faint, but definitely there, and this time it seemed to come from inside the cabin. Cal barked sharply, running to the door, and scratching at it up, flicked on the porch light, and opened the door. Nothing. Noon around. The night was still foggy and quiet. I checked the windows. They were all locked. No signs anyone had been there as it backed down, and that's when I noticed the binoculars. The lenses were fogged up from the inside, like someone had breathed on. Hemi wiped them off with my sleeve, looked through the mud more time toward the ocean. Nothing, no shape, no shimmer, no star distortion. To put the binoculars down, and finally managed to fall asleep. Cal curled at my feet the next morning. I went down to the shore, trying to find any clue, a piece of trash, footprints, anything, but there was nothing out of place, just the usual driftwood and seaweeds. Since then I've kept the binoculars close, but I haven't seen that shape again. The hum comes back, sometimes, always faint, and just on the edge of hearing. I don't know what it was. I don't even know if it was really there, or if I was just too tired and lonely in that cabin. But it felt like something that wasn't meant to be seen, something that slipped in and out of our world, like it didn't belong. Cal doesn't like the coast at night anymore, and I don't blame him. It was parked on the shoulder of Highway 97 somewhere between Weed and Mount Shasta late at night around 2:30 a.m. I guess the K. Indofour, when the world outside your cab feels like it's holding its breath. He was doing my usual overnight run, hauling produce from California up to Oregon, trying to squeeze every hour. I could be for the morning rush. I pulled off for a break at this lonely stretch where the highway cuts through a narrow canyon. There wasn't a single other vehicle 4 miles, just my rig and the cold wind rolling down from the mountains. My dog, Rookus Cruffy Border Collie mix, was that never quit witching, was curled upon the passenger seat half asleep. He had just cracked the door. Open a bit to get some fresh air because the cab gets stale after a few hours. The night was chilly, the kind that makes your breath fog up in the cabify. You're not careful. I had my radio on, just faint noise in the background. The usual trucker chat, or mostly static, and a few sleepy voices. Nothing interesting. He was scrolling through some playlists on my phone when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye beyond the guardrail, maybe 50 feet from the front of my truck. There was a shape hovering just above the ground. At first, I thought it might be some kind of animal. Kiadira or a coyote standing really still, but this was different. It didn't look solid, not exactly, more like a made of thick swirling smoke, or maybe a heath haze. It wasn't casting any light, but I could see it clearly against the road's shoulder dirt and the dark trees behind it. The weirdest part was how it moved. It wasn't walking or running, it paced back and forth, slowly, maybe 5 or 6 feet at a time, almost like it was stuck in a loop, no feet touching the ground. Just this dark, blurred shape gliding silently above the gravel. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I stared or the cold was messing with me, but Rook lifted his head and stared right at it, too low growl rumbling in his throat. I reached for my phone to take a picture, but the screen went black for a second, then came back on with no signal. Weird, but not unheard of out there. I flicked the flashlight upon off a couple times, trying to get a better look. The shape didn't seem to care, no light reflected off it. No shadow, just that odd form pacing in the dark. Then I noticed the noise, a deep loud thrum vibrating through the airs of ain't. First, I almost missed it. It wasn't coming through the speakers or my radio. It was physical. I could feel it pressing in my chest, like standing near a big engine running. Quietly, Rook's growls topped, and he stopped straight, ears prick, but he wasn't barking or whinnying, just tense like he knew something was wrong, but couldn't say what. I rolled up the window, locked the doors, and grabbed my flashlight. It told Rook to stay put, though, He was already glued to the seat aisle and out to sea. If I could catch a better look shining the light toward the shape, it vanished, instantly like someone flipped a switch, just the dark road. And Dempted dirt, a blinked heart pounding, and then it was back, same shape, same slow pacing, no sound, except that thrum which seemed to get louder for a moment, then quieter again. It didn't seem interested in me exactly, but it was definitely aware. I was there, I pulled my phone out again, checked the time, 2:42 a. Man tried to call dispatch, no signal. The radio was static, event the GPS was frozen, stuck on the last location before the signal died. It was like the whole world went dead in this spot. I thought about getting out to walk around, see if I could find anything. Unyu, Sue along the shoulder or the trees. But something stopped me. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a warning. I couldn't ignore the air, felt thicker, heavier, my chest ached from thrum. And Rook's hackles were raised to lock the door, tight, leaned back, and tried to keep my eyes on the spot where it was, pacing it. Kept the same slow back and forth rhythm, like it was stuck in some endless loop just beyond the guardrail, never moving closer, never leaving after maybe 10 minutes. The thrum faded, and the shape dissolved into the darkness like smoke blown away by the wind, no sound. No movement, just empty night. Is it there for a long time, just breathing and listening to the quiet. Returned, my phone buzzed suddenly, a single text from dispatch saying my next stop was rescheduled. He didn't respond, he waited until dawn started to bleed into the sky, then finally rolled out onto the highway. Rook was quiet the whole drive, eyes flicking to the side mirrors and windows, but never. Panicked, I haven't told anyone in detail about what I saw, mostly because I don't really know how to explain it. It wasn't an animal or a person. It wasn't even light or shadow in any normal sense. I still think about that shape pacing just beyond my truck, that low thrum. I could feel in my chest and the way the world went silent and dead around me for those minutes. Don't know what it was or why it showed up there, but it was real and it wasn't alone. The trail camera was supposed to make my life easier. Rise tit up weeks ago along a quiet ridge in the Gila National Forest, just outside Silver City, New Mexico. My name's Eliza and I study wildlife behavior, mostly deer, coyotes, and the occasional mountain lion. The camera helped map track movement without spending every night in the woods. So usually the images are pretty straightforward, blurred shapes darting through the brush, eyes glinting in the dark, but this time something was off. I got back to camp just before sunset. That day, tired from a long hike lugging gear. The air was dry and warm, the kind of heat that lingers after a summer afternoon. My Dona, a lanky blue heeler mix with a sharp nose, and Endla. Synergy waist trailing behind me, sniffing every cactus and juniper. Past we made it to the cabin. I rent from the Forest Service for my research, a small wooden structure with creaky floors and a rusty stove. It felt good to sit down for a bit. But I was eager to check the footage from the camera on that ridge. The trail camera's SD card had dozens of images. Most of them the usual nighttime, wildlife, deer caught in mid-leap, a fox running past with just a bluroffer, and tail raccoons scrambling through the underbrush. The motion sensors seemed to work fine, but the pictures were strange in one way. Every single animal in the photos was blurry, as if they were moving way faster than they could be. The motion blur was heavy, more than I'd ever seen from that camera. I thought maybe the camera was malfunctioning or the sensor was too sensitive. But then I noticed one frame that stood out. It was different from the rest. In this single photo, all the animals were perfectly still, completely sharp. The deer were standing frozen, their legs locked. No blur. Their raccoons sat on a fallen log, motionless. Even a small bobcat crouched at the edge of the frame did. Never a flicker of movement. What made the picture even weirder was that every animal's eyes were fixed straight up, staring at something above the mistard at that photo. For a long time, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. I showed it to my colleague Jonah, who's a bit skeptical about weird stuff, but a good scientist that raised his eyebrows. That's odd. Animals don't usually freeze and all look in the same direction. Like that, you sure this isn't a glitch? It double-checked the camera. It's the only frame like this out of dozens, AZ, and every oth. Our picture has that crazy motion blur. It's like the animals were moving 100 miles an hour, then just stopped dead in their tracks, eyes locked upward. Jonah shrugged, but I could tell he was intrigued. Maybe our predator or a loud noise could have led them. He wanted to believe that, but it didn't explain why they all looked straight up, or why the motion blur in the other pictures was so intense. The next night, I decided to hike up to the ridge myself. Luna came along, tail wagging, always ready for a walk. The sky was clear, the stars beginning to pout one by one. It was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze, and Luna's paws crunching on dirty to the camera spot, and sat down on a rock. Had my flashlight, a thermos with coffee, in my notebook. Luna lay down beside me, alert, but calm. We waited. After a while, I noticed the forest felt different. The usual nighttime sounds seemed muted. The crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, Luna's breathing somehow felt quieter. Then about 30 minutes in, a low hum started. It It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew steadily. I looked up. The sky was clear, but something above the tree line caught my eye, a faint glow pulsing gently, not like any plane or helicopter I'd ever seen. It wasn't flashing or blinking. It just hung there smooth and steady, casting a nod light over the tops of the junipers. So pointed my flashlight upward half, expecting to see something real, but the beam faded uselessly into the night. Luna stood up, ears perked, staring intently. Cole at her back, but she didn't want to move. Then I noticed something else. The shadows beneath the trees shifted, but no breezes stirred the branches. The hum got louder, and the animals around us, mostly small birds and some distant rodents, grew completely silent. No rustling, no chirps. It felt like I was being watched. I reached for my radio to call Jonah, but the signal was gone. No bars, not a single blink. The only connection to the outside world had dropped. I stood up, holding Luna's leash tight. The glow was still the restrained shape just beyond the treetops, hovering almost too steady for anything natural. It wasn't making noise, except for the hum. No engine, now oaring, nothing mechanical I could place. Then I noticed something in the clearing ahead, a faint shimmer like heat waves, but cooler. Somehow the air looked warped, bending the stars behind. It blinked and rubbed my eyes, but it didn't go away for a moment. Time felt slow, stretched out. Luna growled low and pulled back against their leash. I took a step back, and then suddenly the hum stopped, the glow vanished, the shimmer disappeared, and the forest sounds rushed back all at once. Birds chirped, leaves rustled. Luna shook herself and wagged her tail like nothing had happened. It checked my watch. Only about 10 minutes had passed since the glow appeared, but it felt like hours. I hurried back down the trail, Luna trotting faithfully beside me. Ears twitchy sound when I got to the cabin. It tried the radio again. Signal returned. Instantly the phone worked. To looked at the photos from the camera one more time that night. The frozen animal size staring upward, the blurred images. Before and after, something had been there with the mid-don't know what it was or why it showed up. But I keep thinking about those silent eyes and that impossible stillness. I'm not sure if I want to go back to that ridge, but I will. Luna's already restless again, and I need more data. Maybe next time I'll catch whatever that thing was a little clearer, or maybe not. Either way, I'm watching. He was working the late shift at the weather station on a Tuesday night when it happened. My name's Nathaniel, a meteorologist, been doing this for almost 8 years. Now nothing in the job really surprises me anymore. You get used to the quirks of storms, radar glitches, and weird atmospheric phenomena, but that night is a something I still can't explain. It was late May around 11 p.m. We were tracking a pretty strong storm system moving through the Midwest. The station where I worked was in a small town outside Springfield, Missouri. The weather had been building all day, thunderstorms, heavy rain, and a strong cold front pushing through. I'd been monitoring the radar and satellite feeds from my desk for hours, watching the storm's progression. The radar screen showed the usual stuff: high reflectivity, area cells merging, some rotation, hints the normal warnings, but then something caught my eye. A particular storm cell about 50 mi southeast of us, moving northeast, started to behave oddly on their radar. The storm literally split in two. I mean, like a perfect line down the middle, one chunk peeled away from the other cleanly, and immediately it wasn't some gradual division, no merging cells nearby to explain it. The storm just divided. The left half kept moving northeast, while the right half shifted slightly east. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe it was a radar glitch or software. The peak quickly checked the other radars we monitor, and the satellite feed. Everything confirmed the split was real. Then about 15 seconds after the split, something else appeared on the satellite images. It was brief, a small, metallic-looking object, maybe 100 meters in diameter, hovering just above the storm. It showed up as a reflective patch, brighter than the clouds around it, perfectly circular like a disk. It lasted maybe 10 seconds on the feed before vanishing completely. My heart skipped over my coworker, Lydia. She came rushing over, eyes wide, when she saw the satellite image. Webeth froze, staring at the screen. "What the hell is that?" She whispered. I had no answer. We checked the usual databases for aircraft or drones in the area. Nothing, no flight plans, no military exercises reported. The FAA radar didn't pick up anything unusual, no commercial or private flights in that sector. At the time, it tried to replay the satellite footage again and again, zooming and adjusting contrast, but the object was gone after those few seconds. The storm was still there, broken into two parts, now drifting apart. We kept watching the radar and satellite for the next hour. The split storm behaved like two separate systems. No signal off the object coming back. That whole night my mind kept going back to those images. Even stayed after my shift to review the data again, hoping I'd missed some clue. The weirdness wasn't just the splitting or the sudden appearance of that metallic shape. It was the silence afterward. No one else seemed to notice, nor reports on the news. No chatter from other weather stations. So it was like it never happened. I thought maybe I was hallucinating or the equipment was malfunctioning, but the data was there in black and white. The storm split, the object appeared, and Heno things. Since then, I've checked other satellite feeds from different providers. Some of them showed strange artifacts orbs in the same area and time frame, but none as clear as what, so would hold a couple close friends in meteorology, but they just shrugged it off. Probably a glitch or maybe some rare atmospheric reflection, one said. But I'm not convinced the storm split perfectly, like it was cut in half by some invisible line, and that object, it wasn't a plane, a drone, or a satellite artifact. It looked real solid. I look at the footage. I get that uneasy feeling like I's something I wasn't supposed to see. Keep wondering what that thing was doing. They were hovering over the storm and why it disappeared so suddenly. The whole event felt like it was on the edge of reality, something just out of reach, slipping between what we can explain and what we can't, is still don't have answers. But I'm sure of one thing: that night, the storm didn't just split, it was interrupted by something completely different. Something I'll probably never fully understand. I got this voicemail on my phone one evening last spring, but the weird part is that Edom stamp it showed it was left at exactly 9:70 p, which wouldn't be strange, except that at that time I was shicking alone in the middle of the Cascade Mountains out in the wilderness. No cell service at all, my phone didn't get a signal until hours later when I got back to my cart. That's what freaked me out first. How did the voicemail get recorded? Then let me back up a bit. My name's Elise, and I'm an amateur hiker and photographer. I usually go by myself on weekdays after work to avoid the crowds. The trail I chose that day was a moderate one near Mount Hood, about 8 miles round trip, through forest and some rocky ridges. The weather was clear but cool, just a little breeze. I left my phone in airplane mode on. I got a couple miles in because, well, there's no point dragging it around, just to check. Notifications when there's no signal was deep into the trail, about 3 miles from the trailhead, when I noticed the woods felt off, the usual bird sounds were absent, and the forest was unnervingly quiet, not like peaceful quiet, but like the kind of silence where you catch yourself listening for anything. I stopped for a minute and tried to shake it off a couple of times. I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, just shadows shifting, but when I turned to look, nothing was there, just trees and bushes. I kept walking my dog. Scout, a 5-year-old Aussie Shepherd Mem. X was with me. Usually he's hyper-sniffing everything, pulling on the leash, but that day he was oddly calm, just sticking close and staring intently in the woods on my left side. I figured maybe a deer or something had passed through, but Scout was still tense, ears pinned back, eyes fixed at one point. I noticed the air felt the AV like there was static or electricity in it, the normal kind, but more subtle. It's hard to explain. It was almost like the hairs on my arms stood up. For no reason, Scout's tail went stiff. Then I heard it, this faint mechanical whirring. At first I thought it was some distant generator or machinery, maybe from a logging operation or campers, but the area I was in was protected forest. Now anyone was working there, especially midweek. The whirring sound was low and rhythmical, most like something rotating slowly, but it didn't get louder or change in pitch. It just hung in the air, blending in with the silence. As topped walking and looked around, Scout growled softly low in his throat. Fixed spot about 20 feet off the trailish, won my flashlight into the trees. There but saw nothing but the dark shapes of branches. The weirdness didn't tend there. My phone buzzed. It didn't have reception, but the screen lit up like I'd got name Sag or call when I pulled it out. It's how to new voicemail notification. It was sure it was impossible because of no signal later after. I finished the hike and got back to my car. My phone finally connected to the network. The voicemail showed up in my inbox. It was time-stamped for the exact time. I was standing there in the woods when I listened to it. It was just static at first. I thought it was a bad recording or a glitch. But then I heard it underneath the static, this int mechanical whirrings, the exact same sound I'd heard in the forest. The whole message lasted about 15 seconds. No voice now, words, just that high-pitched whirring under layers of static. I played it over and over, trying to catch any patterns or clues. It was like the sound was cycling, mechanical hum mixed with interference, but nothing I could identify. After a while, I showed it to a couple friends who were into audio stuff and paranormal stories. They couldn't figure it out. Either one said it reminded him of the sound from old realtor machines, or some kind of an knowledge equipment malfunctioning. What freaked me out more was the timing. How did a voicemail get recorded when my phone was off network in an area with zero coverage? I don't remember hearing the phone ring or vibrate all while I was on the trail over the next few days. I kept checking the area where I heard the sound he wanted to see, if I could catch whatever was making it. But nothing, no mechanical noise, no strange hum, just for tree, sand, the usual animals coming out at dusks. Scout stayed close to me every time we went back. He seemed wonder like he was expecting something, even caught them growling at empty spots. Just like before, one night about a week later, I was lying in bed and my phone buzzed again with a voicemail alert. This time it was just pure static, now worrying underneath. But the timestamps it was sent at 2 hours after I'd gone to sleep. Didn't answer or call anyone back. I haven't gotten another voicemails since, but I don't leave my phone in normal mode when I'm out hiking anymore. I keep wondering if what I heard was something mechanical, some old equipment forgotten in the forest, or something else entirely. The way the sound was so quiet, so controlled, it didn't seem natural, and the voicemail timing well. I don't have any explanation for that part, to still go back to that trail sometimes, but I'm always watching, always listening for that faint whirring beneath the silence. I was driving home late one Friday night on this stretch of highway that runs through the foothills outside of Salem, Oregon. It's the kind of road that's mostly EMP at night, just long winding asphalt through trees and some open fields. And it's usually quiet, except for the occasional truck or late-night commuter like meth. At night, it was clear and cool early spring, with a little chill in the air. But now it had just gotten off a double shift at the diner where I work, and I was tired, looking forward to crashing once. I got home, was about halfway through the drive, maybe 10 miles out of town, when I noticed something weird up ahead. At first, it looked like a plane was hovering right over the highway. I don't mean flying low or anything normal. It was just there, completely still, hanging, maybe 50 or 60 feet off the ground. No lights blinking, no sound. Nothing, just a dark shape against the clear night sky. I slowed down and blinked a few times, thinking maybe it was some kind of crane or a weird drone or even a helicopter, but the way it just hovered without any noise threw me off. There was no blinking light on at all, which is strange for anything flying over a road. I got closer. As though it start to rotate slowly, like it was turning around an invisible axis. The shape was kind of triangle, or but nothing I recognized from any aircraft I'd ever seen. The edges were smooth, and it didn't look like it had wings or rotors, just this silent dark mass that was moving slowly in place. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling a little uneasy. My headlights didn't seem to shine on it properly. The surface was almost absorbing the light. I kept watching it in my rearview mirror. As I passed underneath, it didn't move forward or sideways, just rotated slowly, completely silent. I couldn't see any support, no cables, no poles, no engines. He wasn't the only one who saw it. Double up 2 weeks later, I found a local online forum where people were talking about the same thing. Drivers reported seeing this dark triangular shape hovering in the exact same spot along the highway, usually between 10:30 and midnight. Everyone described it the same way. Silent, no blinking lights, slow rotation, no visible means of support. A couple of people said their phones lost signal or their GPS acted weird around that stretch of road. Didn't notice that myself, but I didn't check. Either was just glad to get home the next time I drove that way. I'd ride to Lee. Later, hoping to see it again, or at least figure out what it was. I got there around 11:50 p.m. Man, for a while, nothing, just the quiet road, the smell of pine, and my headlights cutting through the dark, then out of nowhere. The same dark shape appeared, hovering over the same spot, rotating slowly as slowed down like last time, watching carefully. But as where my radio started to cut out, like static crackling in and out, the signal was spotty for a few seconds, then came back. The thing didn't move or make a sound. I thought about stopping and getting out of the car, but something made me stay put. I kept my eyes on it as I drove past again. But by the time I was 10 miles down the road, it was gone. I told a coworker about it, but it just laughed at I was probably tired or imagining things. Another driver I talked to said they saw the same thing about a month earlier, but thought it was a weather balloon or a military test. That made me wonder if it was some secret government stuff, but I'd never seen a balloon just sit still and rotate like that and no noise. Doesn't add up. The weirdest part was how calm it felt, not like you'd expect. You'd think seeing something like that would freak you out, but I was just quiet, like the thing didn't want me to be scared or anything, just there watching. After a few weeks, I stopped driving that route late at night. I figure it was better not to mess with whatever that was. One night, I was coming back from a friend's place about 2 a.m. and I noticed headlights behind. I thought it was someone just catching up. But as I glanced in my mirror, the car behind me slowed down tooth and stopped on the shoulder. It pulled over to see if they needed help or something. The driver was a woman named Laura, a local from down the road. She told me she'd seen the same dark shape hovering over the highway at night and had been tubed out to drive past it. We talked for a bit, and she said she felt like the thing was watching her too, like it was waiting. Neither of us could explain what it was or why it just sat there spinning slowly. The next morning, I went back out with my phone camera hoping to catch something, but no matter how many times I asked that spot during the day, the shape never appeared. It was like it only showed up at night in the dark. I never saw it again after that last sighting. But every time I drive that highway at night, now I glance up, half expecting to see it hovering silently, rotating, waiting, no flashing lights. No noise, just there watching. I woke up because something was itching at the back of my neck. But it wasn't like the usual kind of itch. It felt sharper, almost like tiny needles. I rolled over groggy and saw a faint tread glow through my window. It wasn't the streetlights or headlights from the road behind the house. This was different, kind of unnatural. I live in this old two-story house in a sleepy suburb in Northern Oregon. My name's Carterium 17, and nothing like this had ever happened around here. The sky was clear when I went to bed, no clouds or wind, so that weird glow's the first weird thing I got up and looked out my bedroom window toward the roof, thinking maybe a fire or something. Nothing was burning, but the glow was coming from above the house. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out the window onto the roof ladder Dade installed for cleaning. In gutters, my heart was pounding a little, not from fear exactly, just because it was late, and I was suddenly wide awake. When I reached the roof, I saw it right away, dozens of tinny round burns in the shingles, arranged in a perfect hexagonal grid. The spots were small, maybe half an inch each, and the way they were spaced out looked almost too perfect to be natural. The sun hadn't come up yet, but the faint red glow was still there, hovering above the trees across the street. It crouched down and inspected the burns. The shingles were scorched around each dot, but no melted edges or so. Oh, just these neat little holes, like someone had carefully burned them with a tinny torch. It thought maybe some vandal or idiot with fireworks, but the pattern was so precise, it didn't make sense. I called my mom, who was up for work early, but she thought I was joking when I told her about the burns. Maybe raccoons, she said, but raccoons don't make perfect shapes on a roof, and they sure as hell don't. Tinny burn marks. After that, I went back inside and checked the news. Nothing about storms, lightning, or anything unusual nearby. Even looked up local lightning strike maps online. The closest sensor was just a couple of miles from my house, and there wasn't a single recorded strike all night. The weather app showed clear skies and calm winds at school the next day. I told my friends about it. Some laughed, some thought I was messing with them, but none of them had explanations. Nobody else had seen anything weird that night. I stayed up on the roof again, hoping to catch something, maybe a firework, a plane, or some light source. I had my phone out recording with the flashlight on, but hours passed and nothing happened. No lights, no sounds, just the quiet hum of crickets. When I finally came down around midnight, I noticed something else, a faint ringing in my ears, like a soft electrical buzz. I had noticed it before. It stayed with me for the next day or two, barely loud enough to really notice unless it was quiet a few days later. I was walking home from baseball practice when I saw a couple of people standing by the field across the street from my house, pointing cameras spat the sky. They were talking about some weird lights that had been spotted over the neighborhood a few nights ago. We didn't say anything alike, but maybe that red glow wasn't just in my head. The weirdest part was when my dad finally took a look at the roof. He's a handyman, and was as baffled as I was. She said the shingles looked scorched, but didn't smell burned, and the holes didn't go all the way through, like something had focused heat or energy without physically damaging the wood underneath. Thinking about the pattern, the weight. Heburn's line duplicate some kind of message or design, but when it tried to show someone else, they just saw a bunch of tinny burn marks, no pattern. And the red glow, it never showed up again. Weeks went by and things returned to normal. The burns stayed on the roof, slowly fading in color, but never disappearing. The ring in my ears went away, and the neighborhood was quiet. But sometimes when I'm outside at night, I get this strange feeling like something is watching. I glance up at the sky, hoping to see something, anything to make sense of it all. But the sky stays empty, except for the star. See was walking my dog, Jasper, late one evening in early spring around 8 p.m. The sky still light but fading fast. We usually stuck to the trail behind my place in rural Vermont, a long stretch that runs alongside some open fields and woods. It's quiet out there, especially at an hour, just the occasional car far off on the main road. The sound of crickets starting up. Jasper had been pretty energetic that day, a mix of border collie and leb, so I figured a long walk would tire him out. The air was cool but not cold, the kind of weather where you wear a light jacket. And maybe there was some leftover haze from earlier rain, low and wispy, hovering over the fields, softening the edges of everything. We were about halfway down the trail when Jasper suddenly stopped. He was sniffing along the grass, nose to the ground like usual, then just froze, ears straight up, his whole body stiffening. Had turned and looked directly at the open field to our left. Not Reese, just grass stretching out to a distant line of woods. I called his name. Jasper, nothing, hadn't even blink, then held out this low growl, quittin' like he was warning me scan. Ed the field, half expecting to see some animal, maybe a deer or a coyote, sneaking through the tall grass. But there was nothing, no movement, no sound, besides the creak of branches swaying in the breeze. That's when it did, a faint ringing in the air, high-pitched, barely noticeable, at first like a distant tuning fork, forth a tinny whine of an old fluorescent light bulb. It wasn't coming from any direction I could pick out. It seemed to fill the space around. Yuza looked at Jasper, whose growling stopped, replaced by an alertness so sharp I could practically see it. The ringing grew just a little louder, enough that I was sure I wasn't imagining it. My skin prickled, the hairs on my neck standing. One discanned the field again. It was still empty. Then suddenly as it started, the ringing cut off complete silence. Jasper dropped his guard too, but stayed close to me, eyes darting around like he was trying to figure out what was going on. I wanted to call a weird sensory thing, maybe some distant power line humming or animal's high-frequency call. I just couldn't identify, but the silence that followed was heavy, almost oppressive. No crickets, no birds, now and in the trees. Just nothing. I reached down and petted Jasper, trying to calm both of us. She looked up at them, back at the field, still uneasy but not growling anymore. I debated whether to keep walking or turn around. The weirdness made me want to head home, but something made me push on. We moved a few steps deeper into the trail when I caught movement near the tree beneath the edge of the field. Just a flash. Like a shadow slipping behind a trunk. It stopped dead. Jasper pulled at the leash. Again, body tense, he whispered, "Who's there?" But no answer came. The forest stayed still, no rustling or snapping twigs, like walking faster. Now with Jasper close every soofin, I'd glance back toward the field, half expecting to see those 3 red lights, or whatever that other people talk about in stories, but there was no thing the whole way back to my truck. Their ringing never returned. The night noises came back, the crickets and frogs filling the air again, normal, like nothing had happened. I still think about that moment, the frozen dog, the ringing that appeared out of nowhere, then vanished in the silent field. With nothing in it but empty grass. I can't explain any of it, but I know what as I went heard that night. It's just strange. I didn't expect to be writing this down, honestly, never really been the type to believe in weird stuff, but what happened that weekend in the Colorado Rockies has stuck with me, and I guess putting it into words might help me make some kind of sense of it. Me and my buddy Darren had planned a quick camping trip up near the Indian Peaks wilderness. We wanted something low-key, just a couple nights away from the city noise. We drove up Friday afternoon, and after a couple hours on a dirt road that got narrower and bumpier, the higher we went, we found a small clearing near a creek. It wasn't marked on any map, just a spot Darren had found years ago. Una hiking for him, we figured it'd be quiet, and it was. The day was clear, but cold, early October, and the sun was dropping fast by the time. We stepped camp. Darren pitched the tent, while I gathered some firewood. His dog, a begoofy named Rufus, ran around, sniffing everything, happy as could be. The woods were dense around us, tall pines with thick branches, and the creek babbled softly near. By that first night was normal, wet, some canned chili, drank some beer, and talked about nothing much. The sky was clear, stars shining bright. Rufus curled up between us, occasionally lifting his head to listen to sounds in the woods. But then around midnight, things started to get weird. First, it was this soft knocking sound, like someone tapping a stick, good but steady and rhythmic. It wasn't coming from the trees, or the ground, it was coming from above. I looked up, thinking maybe it was a branch rubbing against the tent or something, but the tent was quiet, and the knocking waste to regular to be wind. Darren heard it too. We both sat up listening. Knock, pause, knock, pause, knock, knock, pause, knock. It wasn't a pattern I could make sense of, but it wasn't random. Either it reminded me of Morse code or some kind of signal. We stayed quiet, eyes on the treetops, but couldn't see anything. Rufus got uneasy. He stood up and growled low, his ears perked forward. Then Darren spotted something above the clearing between the tops of the pines. 3 red lights blinked in sequences, lowly, calmly, like a triangle. They hovered. They're not moving and totally silent at first. It thought maybe it was some sort of drone or remote-controlled thing, but the lights weren't flashing like drone LEDs. They blinked one at a time, steady like a signal, and there was no noise, no buzzing, no engine hum, just this strange knocking in the blinking lights. It tried to focus my eyes to see if I could make out any shape around the lights, but there was nothing visible. Just 3 points of red light, perfectly spaced, floating way too still. The knocking kept going steady and calm, as if it were coming from the lights themselves. He wanted to call out or wave, but Darren shook his head. Weth just watched. The forest felt dead quiet. Besides the knocking, the usual night sounds, crickets, owls, rustling, were all gone. After maybe 10 minutes, the lights blinked faster. The knocking speeded up too, then suddenly things stopped. Knocking, no blinking, nothing. Just the black sky with stars. Again we waited a few minutes, but the lights didn't come back. I checked my phone, no signal, which wasn't a surprise. This far out, Darren turned on his flashlight and shone it around. The woods looked normal, the creek still flowing, Rufus cautiously sniffing around. Neither of us said much. We tried to laugh it off as some kind of weird coincidence or a prank from other campers. But there was noon else out there 4 miles. The next day, we found no footprints or signs anyone else had near the Clee. Airing the ground was undisturbed, not rash hortracks that night. The knocking and lights didn't come back, but I kept waking up feeling like something was watching us. Rufus stayed glued to Darren's side, growling at shadows. I couldn't see. We packed up early the next morning, not wanting to stick around longer than necessary on the drive back down the mountain. I kept glancing at the sky, half expecting to see those lights again. I still don't know what that knocking was, or where those red lights came from. Nothing I've ever read or seen matches it. No sound, no shape, just Astra. And a signal from the sky that vanished like it never happened. I've told a few friends about it, but none really knows what to make of it. Either I'm not sure. I do it's the kind of thing that doesn't fit anywhere, like a secret hidden in the dark between the trees. I've been into drones for a few years now, mostly just flying my quadcopter around fields and parks near where I live in western Kansas. Nothing fancy, just a hobby to kill time on weekends. Well, I'm not a professional or anything, but I enjoy the challenge of getting smooth shots and trying to map out patterns. And hell, from above that Saturday was unusually warm for April. The kind of dry heat that sits heavy in the air. Even after the sun goes down, I decided to take my drone out late afternoon around 6 p.m. when the sun was low and the shadows stretched long across the fields. I figured the lighting would be good for some cool aerial shot. So loaded the drone into the back of my truck and drove out to a spot I've been meaning to check for a while, a patch of farmland about 5 miles east of my place, just off a Grayville County road. It heard some locals mention strange crow patterns around there, but I always thought it was just weird growth or normal farmer stuff. Nothing serious when I got there. The field was just a big rectangular stretch of corn. The stalks were just starting to green up, but in one corner, I noticed it looked different. There were patterns in the crop, almost geometric, but even like someone had pressed down the plants in wide arcs and circles, nothing like the classic crop circle. Easy you hear about on the news, but still weird enough to catch my eye. As the drone died a quick systems check and launched it straight up. The controls were responsive, signal strong, and the camera feed crisp on my tablet tiffle with low over the crop field, aiming the camera down to catch the patterns from above as I guided it closer to the strange part of the field. The feed started to glitch, small flickers, at first like interference, but then the video froze for a moment, and the drone's controls got sluggish. It thought maybe it was a glitch in the hardware or signal. Interference from something nearby it. Ride moving the drone back toward me, but the controls felt delayed, like it was dragging behind. Then the screen went black for a second. The drone was still up there, but the feed was gone, no signal. Waited here, connect button on the app. A few times nothing. It called out loud like that would help. Come on, buddy, don't do this. To met the drone kept drifting over the crop patterns out of sight, behind a small rise at the edge of the field. He jumped in my truck and drove toward where it was last seen, hoping the signal would come back. If I got closer, when I reached the edge of the field, I stepped out and looked around. The pattern stretched out before me, the fading light, those flattened arcs and circles. The air was still now in no bird song. Just this eerie quiet. Walked into the field, moving carefully, so I wouldn't trample the plants. The dirt underfoot was dry and cracked. The patterns weren't smooth or perfect, more like someone had pressed down the stalks with their feet or a board. But there was not rail leading in or out, no footprints. So called forth the drone, again hoping it'd buzz back to me on its own. No. Things suddenly, there was this bright flash of light overhead. It was quick, like someone shone a massive flashlight straight down, not from a plane or helicopter, no sound. Either, which was odd for something that bright. I blinked and looked up, but the sky was just a deep blue with the first stars coming out in a source for the light. It felt unnatural, like the kind of brightness you don't expect in a field late night. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to keep looking around. The air felt the aviar. The temperature seemed to drop. I shivered, though it wasn't cold, Beth. After a few minutes, it checked my table tag and the drone app was back online. The feed popped up with statica. First, then cleared. The drone was hovering above the field, just outside the circle patterns, but the camera was pointing straight up at the sky. It tapped to rotate the camera. Down the feed flickered again, then suddenly cut to a bright white flash that filled the whole screen. It lasted maybe a second before the feed went dead again. I hit every button trying to reconnect, but it never came back. It stood there for what felt like a long time. The sun had almost complete. Elysatan, the field looked like a patchwork of black and green under the early stars. My skin prickled like I was being watched. Eventually, I packed up and left. The drone was gone, no signal, no GPS location. I called the manufacturer's support line the next day, but they said if it's out of range or powered down, there is no way to track it. It went back a few times in the following weeks, but the crop patterns were gone. The field was just normal. Corn again, evenly grown, no flattened circles, no strange arcs. Send the drone, it's showed up in the mail about a month later. Note, no package. Slipped just my quadcopter in the original box with the battery fully drained. It plugged it in, powered it up, and reviewed the last saved videos. The only thing saved was a few seconds of static. Then that sudden flash of light from the sky. Nothing else. I still don't know what happened that night, or why the drone lost signal right over those patterns, or where it went for that whole month before show. Ingu pat my door. All I know is that field, those patterns, and that light didn't fit anything. I understand, and I've stopped going out. There we were heading back from fishing out near Lake Meredith, me, Tessa, and my cousin Wyatt. It was late somewhere past 11, and we'd taken the old service road instead of the highway, which was probably stupid, but we were in Wyatt's truck and he liked cutting through that stretch for the view. Even though it's just brush, dirt, and wind turbines, we didn't see another car 4 miles, just dry flat land. And those tall white turbines spinning, slow in the dark, the sky was clear no moon. But you could see every star. It was one of those weirdly warm spring nights, like it should have been cold. But the air felt theavy and still now. In Tall, we were maybe 15 minutes from getting back to town. When we saw the car, it was a gray sedan parked half in the road and half on the shoulder, maybe 30 yards ahead. Ahead, headlights were on driver's door hanging wide open engine. Running, we could hear it as we got closer. Zart, his soft tune hum that didn't sound right. Wyatt slowed down, and we just sort of stared at it noon inside. Omovmana pulled over a few feet back from it and left, his truck running. None of us got out. At first, we were just quiet. Then Tessa said, "That's weird." And I remember her voice sounded flat, not scared exactly, just if I got first walked up slow, hands in my hoodie pocket. I think part of me expected someone to pop out, maybe a guy peeing in the bushes or someone changing a flat. But there weren't any bushes, and the tires were fine. I leaned in and looked around the interior purse on the passenger seat, phone in the cup holder, keys. Still in the ignition, the headlights were shining out into the field beside the road. And that's when I went right, where the beam shit maybe 30 feet ahead was a perfect circle of scorched. Grass not trampled, not burned like from a fire, just black and charred all the way through. But nothing around it was touched, just this flat round patch about the size of a backyard pool. Maybe 15 feet across him. Wyatt came up behind me and said, "That ain't a campfire." And he was right. There was no debris, no tire tracks near it, no sign of anything burning its way in or out. And the weirdest part, the grass wasn't flattened. It was still standing up, just dead black and brittle, like it had been cooked straight through. Tessa stayed in the truck. She rolled the window down and asked if we should call it in. I said, yeah, maybe. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the car and the patch in the same frame. But when I opened the gallery to check, it was just black, like the lens cap had been one vent. Oh, it obviously wasn't. It tried again, same thing, just pure black squares, not blurry, not overexposed, just nothing. It didn't say anything right. Then I just stuck the phone back in my pocket. Wyatt circled these, Dan, looking for signs of damage. There weren't any there. Our passenger door had a small smear of mud on it, like someone brushed past in a hurry. That was it. The grass along the edge of the field hadn't been stepped on there, not rail, no print. She popped his head into the driver's side and looked around. It's in park, he said, full tank windows down in the back. No asked if it could have been stolen and ditched. He just gave me look like stolen and ditched in the middle of. Now where with the lights on, and the keys still in it didn't add up. Wes stood there for a bit, not saying much. Just listening. The air felt wrong, like it was too quiet, no bugs. When just that low hum of the engine and the turbines turning way off in the distance. Then something buzzed Wyatt's phone. Hecheck. Editan frowned. No service, he said, and held it up like that'd change anything. I looked at mine cemento bars, which didn't make sense, because we were close enough to the wind farm that there were usual Lithry towers in range. I'd streamed YouTube that area. Before Wyatt said we should drive into town and report it, let the sheriff's office handle it. He agreed. But then he turned to get back and that froze. What the hell? Look, Tessa was gone. Passenger doors still shut, windows till down, her seat was empty. It took off running, yelled her name, no answer. I ran around the side of the truck, half expecting her to be crouched behind it messing with us, but she wasn't there. Driver's side door still shut, tooth grass on the shoulder, undisturbed. It couldn't have been more than 10 seconds since we saw where last. She couldn't have gotten farther. Was nothing to hide behind anyway, just flat land on sky and that burnt circle out in the field. Wyatt shouted and took off toward it. It followed. We got to the edge and stopped. It was cold near the patch, not like a breeze, just colder. The air dropped 10 degrees. You could feel it in your teeth. The soil crunched under our boots like it had been through a fire. But there was nothing drifting or smoldering, just dry blackness. We circled the edge, no tracks, in a route, no sound, except her breathing. Then we heard the truck horn. Wes spun around, headlights flashed. Tessa was back in the truck, sitting in the front seat. Eyes wide, she looked pale. Wyatt sprinted back, calling her name. I was right behind him when we got there. She was shaking, said she didn't remember leaving the truck 1 second. She was watching us by these dant. The next, she was sitting in the seat alone. She swore she hadn't moved, but her boots were dusty, like she'd been walking through the field. And there was a smudge of soot on the back of her jacket. We didn't ask more questions. We just left. We drove straight to the sheriff's office and reported the car, gave the location, told them it looked abandoned, left the rest next morning. We called to follow up. The deputy said they'd found the vehicle, but nothing unusual, just a stalled sedan, engine cold, no sign of the owner, towed it to impound. No mention of the scorched grass, nor report of the door being open as skied, if they found a purse or phone inside. They said no clean interior, nothing of note. It checked my phone again later that day. The pictures I had taken were gone, no in black squares anymore, just missing like they never X. Instead, the only trace was a blank spot in my camera roll where the thumbnail skipped a few seconds. Wouldn't talk about it. It again after that, not really Tessaw on't gone arth that part of the county anymore. We at sold the truck a few months later, claimed it had electrical issues, but it never saw one. I still think about that cart, the way the engine sounded like it was straining the way. The grass was just dead in a perfect circle. I don't have a word for what we saw wall. I know as we weren't supposed to be there. It started around 11:40 p.m. on a Thursday. I remember because I just finished brushing my teeth and was about to take the trash out when the kitchen light blinked off, came back on, then went out again completely. The house went quiet in that weird way where you don't realize how much noise there is until it's gone. From the ceiling fan, the neighbor's TV through the wall, all of it just stopped. At first, I figured it was just our power happened say few times a year. I grabbed the flashlight from the junk drawer and stepped out onto the porch. We live in a little town called Pinefield, tucked in the hills about an hour south of Erie. Small own a gas station, not traffic lights, that kind of place, but even from my porch, I could see the rest of the street was dark to porch lights, no street lamps. The whole town looked like it had been unplugged. It was standing out there trying to get a signal on my phone when I noticed something strange about the sky. It wasn't dark. There was this soft flickering glow coming from the direction of the DC stuff town just past the old fire road. It reminded me of heat lightning, but steadier, more rhythmic, sort of pulse like the way a candle flickers in a draft, but brighter, whiter. Then I heard the hum at first. I thought it was just in my head, a low vibrational, most like a diesel engine idling far off, but there were no cars moving, and it wasn't coming from the ground. It was overhead, not right above me, but up and out toward the trees, deep and low, but not loudy. You could feel it more than hear it. To walk down the steps with the flashlight still off. Didn't want to mess up my eyes. Adjusting a couple houses over, Mrs. Abbott's porch light flicked on and off, then stayed out as a weresilhat behind the curtain, like she was looking out too. I waved, but she didn't wave back. The hum started getting louder, not by a lot, just enough to notice it wasn't steady. It would sort of swell and dick something spinning, and the light behind the trees got brighter, more defined. I could make out the shape of it. Now it wasn't a beam or a spotlight. It was a dome, a half sphere of white-blue light, maybe a mile or two past the tree line, sitting above the horizon, like a bee. Bubble on the verge of popping, it flickered in this odd way, like each pulse was slightly out of sync with the next. It didn't look like fire or electricity. It didn't look like anything I could name. I wasn't the only one seeing it down the road. I spotted the guy who runs the mechanic shop, standing in the middle of his yard with a pair of binoculars around his neck. He walked over. I didn't say anything for a while, just kept staring toward the trees like he was waiting for something to come out of them. "You hear it?" He asked. Hanad started about 10 minutes ago. Lost power just before you seen lightning like that before. Nope, we stirred together for a bit, not talking. His dog Pepper was pacing in circles in the yard, sniffing the air. Tailou not barking, not whining, just a jaded. It was strange because she's usually loud. As Shella reached down to pet her, and she flinched after a few more minutes. The hum got deeper, not louder exactly. It just felt like it moved lower into my chest, like when a plane flies directly over you, and the pressure shifts in your ears. My vision felt a little off to like everything had a light shimmer around the edges. I kept blinking, thinking I was just tired or something. Then the light blinked. It don't mean it dimmed, it shut off 1 second. There was this huge glowing dome over the trees. The next it was just gone. The darkness hit like someone dropped a blanket over the sky, and a flicker nova just click out. And with it the hum stopped. Everything went totally still. It was so quiet. I could hear Pepper panting. Dean turned to me and said, "That ain't natural." Before I could say anything back, every care alarm on the street went off at once. Just a sudden burst of noise, honking lights, flashing horns, blaring. My flashlight flickered and died in my hand. He fumbled to turn it back on, but it wouldn't respond. Then they all stopped at once, the same way the light had just off. I started feeling dizzy. After that, not like spinning, more like my depth perception was off. I looked up and realized the stars were back, all of them, but wrong. It's hard to explain. They were there, but not where they should have been. The Big Dipper looked tilted, and Orion was higher than I remembered. I don't know enough about astronomy to say for sure, but it felt wrong, just off enough to notice. Then was staring at the sky too. He whispered something I didn't catch, turned and went inside without another word. I stayed out for a few more minutes. The air smelled weird, like warm electronics, the way an old TV smells after it's been running too long around midnight. The power came back, lights flicked on one by one down the street. The hum didn't come back. The stars looked normal again. My flashlight started working like nothing had happened. Next day, I went into town and asked around the folks over in Marlow and Stanton, the next two town. Sover said they'd had the same outage about 20 minutes long just after 11:30 power cutout, with now warning some of them mentioned hearing a vibration, and a few said their phones went dead and wouldn't turn back on until morning. One guy, Randy Beck, who's way out past the ridges, said he saw the light too, described it the same way, dome-shaped flickering hovering above the trees. Said Heth thought a transformer blew out first, but there was no smoke or fire, and no crews came out. After what stuck with me the most, though, was what June Lister said she's got a place near the fire road closest to where the light had been. She told me she woke up to her house shaking quietly, not like an earthquake, more like the walls were vibrating. She said it only lasted a minute, but when she looked out the back window, the woods were lit like stadium lights. Your dog, Boomer, had been hiding under the bed drooling and trembling, and wouldn't come out until morning. None of it made the news. We didn't get an explanation. The electric company said it was scheduled maintenance event. Ho Noon was warned not. Rux came now. Workers, the outages were too wide, too sudden. It's been quiet since. No more lights, no hums. But now I don't take the trash out after dark. You don't stand on the porch and look at the sky. And when the power flickers, even just dawns, I feel my chest got tight, and I wait to hearth that low sound again. It was up in the Adirondacks last October, trying to get to last good hike, and before the snow came, took a week off. Rented this little cabin near. Still, water reservoir, nothing fancy. Woods to Veno, Wi-Fi and a cell signal, unless I hiked up the ridge out back. That was kind of the point. I needed a break from everything. I brought my dog, Rook, a gangly black and white mute I got from a rescue in Albany. He's usually nervous in new places, but he loves the woods. So it happened on my third day out. Their weather had turned weird warm for the season, but humid like late August, not mid-fall. The leaves were mostly down, so the trail was slippery, and played decided to take the side loop off Red Horse Trail, one that followed an old logging road. It wasn't on the main map, but the cabin owner had pointed it out to me. Said it made for a quiet loop with almost no foot traffic. I left around 10:30 a. Took my time, stopped for lunch near Creek. Rook was in high spirits, chasing squirrels and sniffing everything. I had planned to be back 3 sometime afternoon. I noticed the trail got harder to follow. No overgrown exactly, just vague. The ground had this thick carpet of wet leaves, and the trees started looking real similar in every direction. I wasn't worried. I had a compass and the GPS on my phone, usually wore key don'ts. I climbed a bit. Still, I kept glancing around more than usual. That's when I stepped into it. There wasn't a visible line or anything, just suddenly the air felt different, thicker. Maybe my ears popped, not like on a plane, but sharp both at once. Rook frozen, not like he heard something, more like he hit an invisible wall. His stale tail dropped, and he started backing up, but slowly, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. It called to him, but my voice sounded flat. That was the first thing that really rattled me. I could hear myself speak, but there was no echonavorest sounds under it. Now when no birds, nothing, just me and Rook in this dead air. Stepped forward again, maybe 5 or 6 feet. It was like walking into a pressure bubble. My scalp prickly, like when you stand too close to a TV with static. Rook stayed back. I turned to look at Hyman. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Just stood the rest stiff as a board. Still my phone out. More out of habit than anything. No signal I suspected, but the clock said 27 p. For a while last time I checked, it was just before 1 when I stopped for lunch. I couldn't figure it out. I hadn't been walking that long. He wasn't tired. I hadn't eaten again or taken Anapor or anything. I remember the whole hike up to that point. But somehow I'd lost nearly 2 hours. I backed out the way. I came as soon as I crossed whatever threshold I'd stepped through. My ears popped again, this time in reverse, and the forest noise came rushing back. Wind in the branches. Birds, a squirrel scampering off through the brush. Rook bolted toward me and pressed against my leg, shaking like he'd been cold. Event thought the air was warm. I stood the ref for a while, staring at the spot. I just walked out from the outside. It didn't look any different. Same trees, same rocks, same light. But it felt wrong, like a place pretending to be a forest. Eventually, I'd ride to go around. It had figured maybe it was just a weird patch of weather or something, and I could loop around and get back on the trail. But no matter which way I went, I kept ending up back at the same spot. I tried going left for 10 minutes, marking trees with a Bitoff tape, bright orange stuff. I always carrying my pack, but the tape would vanish after 20 yards. City done to a low branch and watched it. Took 10 steps forward, turned around, gone. I didn't like that. It turned around completely and followed my ridge trail back the way I came. It took me almost twice as long to get back to the creek. The sun was already behind the ridge by the time I made it to familiar ground. It didn't see another hiker all day. When I got back to the cabin, it was almost 6 p.m. My legs ached like I'd done a 20 loop, but my GPS track, which I'd set to record the hikes, showed a total distance of only 5.4 miles. It cut off completely at 12:52 p. Then resumed again at 3:06 p.m. from nearly the same coordinate. That stuck with me and still does was what happened that night. He was inside with the woods going trying to calm Rook down. He kept pacing, wouldn't touch his food. He'd stare out the window, then got to the door, then back to the corner, and lie down only to get up again a minute later. I finally let him out to see if he had to go, and the second I opened the door he bolted. I had to chase him down the trail with a flashlight. He stopped maybe 50 feet from the cabin. Panting hackles up, staring at the woods in the direction of Patch. The flashlight beam flickered, not like the battery was dying, more like interference. That doesn't make sense, I know, but it felt like the light itself was being pulled or bent to turn back fast. And Rook followed without needing to be called at around 2 m. I woke up to a high-pitched buzzing sound, real faint, almost like a dentist drill off in the distance. It started low, grew a little, then cut. Utruk was sitting up, eyes fixed on the wall, like he could see something moving outside. There was no light out, the Renault sound after the buzz stopped, just stillness. I didn't go out next morning. I packed up early, cut the trip's hoard. It told the cabin owner I wasn't feeling well. He didn't seem surprised, just nodded and said, "And sometimes I haven't gone back." He worked nights at a distribution warehouse just outside of Silesia, Oklahoma for about 3 years, mostly quiet shift. Especially after midnight, my job was to stay in the guard shack by the gate log trucks as they came, and went and occasionally do a walk around the lot if something set off the motion lights. It was boring work, but I didn't mind. It gave me time to read or watch stuff on my phone. The only other person on site most nights was Dave, the forklift tech who worked the swing shift. He usually left by 10 or 11, unless he got behind on maintenance. This happened in March last year, cold but not freezing, one of those clear, dry nights where the wind makes everything feels harperier. Remember, because I brought leftover chili in a thermos, and it actually stayed warm between the shack and my mouth around 1:30 a.m. I was watching some old episode of Dirty Jobs on my phone when one of the cameras in the northeast yard flicked over, motion activated. That in itself wasn't weird. Possums winds sometimes event the light flickering could trigger. What was weird was what it's how'd. They yard lights cast this dull range was hover everything in the camera, feed just above the old shipping trailers lined along the fence. There was something hovering. I don't know how else to say it. It wasn't touching the ground, maybe 10 or 12 feet up, oval-shaped, dark center, and sort of a shimmer around the edges, not glowing, not blinking, just like heat distortion, like what you'd see above asphalt on a hot day. I stared at it for a good 30 seconds without moving it. Thought maybe it was a glitch, but nothing else on the screen was acting up. The camera wasn't frozen. It could see a flag near the gate, barely fluttering in the wind. None of the motion lights blinked on near the middle lot, but the thing just hung there, no movement, nose. Aunda toggled the other cameras to see if I could catch it from a different angle. Camera 6 caught part of the trailer row too, but from the side. And there it was again, same height, same distance from the ground. It wasn't Alan's thing. It flipped back to camera 4, and it was still there. So I radioed the main office line, mostly out of procedure. Noon answered, which wasn't surprising. Then I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. Took me about a minute to get from the shack to that part of the yard. It's a long walk, especially at night, all gravel and stiff weeds along the edges. The trailers were dark and locked, old units we didn't even use anymore. I kept looking up as I walked, expecting to see it again. But there was no thing in the sky, no sound, no lights, not race of anything. It checked behind the trailers, peeked underneath, nothing, just a beer can and an old tarp someone had stuffed under the axles. Sis stood there for a while trying to figure out what to do. I even waved the flashlight up toward the sky like an idiot, thinking maybe I'd see something catch the beam. But it was just empty air when I got back to the shack. The monitor was still on. The split screener ruined the footage time I'd seen it, 1:34 a.m. Nothing. The camera blipped for a second, like it lost signal, then jumped straight to 1:36 clean. Jumped, no error message, nor recording in between, just skipped it. Every camera was the same. All of them had a gap of exactly 1 minute and 52 seconds. Give or take. It checked 3 times. So I thought maybe I'd messed up the playback, so I saved a copy of the files and emailed them to myself. Just in case. The software time-stamped the gaps, automatically footage unavailable. No reason why. It's hecked the logs for system errors. Nothing listed after that. The rest of the shift crawled by. Iped, glancing at the monitor, shopping I'd see it again. But the yard stayed quiet. The wind picked up a little and around 3 Izawarku near the dumpster, but that was it when morning rolled around. It told the day manager, Clive, what I'd seen. He's ex-military, noon sense. He just gave me this blank look and said, "The cameras sometimes glitch when the cold snap shit the wiring." I asked if they'd explain the exact missing time blocks, so on all feeds she didn't answer that night. I came in a little early to check the saved video from the day shift. No interruptions, no gaps, everything worked like normal. It was only during my shift, that specific window, I watched the whole overnight feed. Twice nothing showed up again a week later. The system auto-deleted the archive, as it always does after 7 days. I had the clips. I emailed myself, but when it tried to open them on my laptop, The files were corrupted. It tried converting them running repair tools. Noth. Ingwork just broken data. I asked Clive if the external hard drive had backup. She said we didn't have the budget for that. The weirdest part came about a month after. I was walking past the fence line near the trailers again mid-shift, just stretching my legs that corner of the yard. Always gave me the creeps after what happened. But I forced myself to walk. It felt stupid, being scared of nothing. I noticed the gravel there looked different. Not disturbed, not dug up, just flatter smoother, like it had been packed down without anything driving over it. It wasn't muddy. No, tracks, but the ground was tighter in a perfect circle about 10 feet across, not freshly laid gravel, just pressed like weight had sat there a while. And then vanished. Didn't mention that part to anyone. I didn't think it would help. I worked that job. Another 6 before it transferred to a different site. Never saw anything like that again. He was driving back from my sister's place in Dion, cutting through the back roads, like I always do to avoid the tolls. It was close to 1 early March cold, but not snowing. I remember that specifically because there was a weird mist hugging the fields, not fog, just a low-lying haze, the kind that doesn't really affect visibility, but makes the world look off, somehow quieter than it should be. Was about halfway between Westport and Tiberton, middle of nowhere, just 2-lane asphalt, no light streets on both sides like walls. It had the heater on low and the radio tuned to some oldie station out of Providence. It was playing Baby Come Back, or something like that. It wasn't really listening, just kind of zoning out. Then the song cut off mid-chorus, not a fade, just gone silence for maybe 3 seconds, and then this sound started up. It wasn't static note. It was more like a rush of air layered with whispers, not clear, not words. I could understand. It was like 10 people whispering a tons in another room with the door shut. Nothing about it felt like a normal signal. Thought maybe I drifted out of range of the station. But when I hit the seek button, it just bounced between identical versions of the same sound, every frequency. FM/AM didn't matter, all of it was that same his whisper mix. It figured something was wrong with the radio, it shut it off, then backo. And still the same, unplugged my phone to try, Bluetooth, nothing. It wouldn't connect. The screen on the dash just froze, like it was stuck. Loading. It pulled over about a meal later, more out of frustration than anything. No shoulder, just a patch of grass where a dirt path split off into the woods. It killed the engine and sat there listening. Everything outside was dead quiet, no crickets. Now in no event the usual ticking from the engine cooling down. The radio was still on, that same static whispering coming from the speakers lower now, but still there is tept out of the cartos. I maybe there was interference from something nearby. I don't even know what. I thought I was going to find the second I closed the door. It hit me how cold. It was not freezing, but colder than it should have been for March. And the mist was thicker there. It clung to my clothes the way ocean air does. But there was no salt, no smell at all. I stood by the driver's side and looked around. No lights in either direction, no houses, no movement. It tried my phone. No vent the emergency SOS on that part. Bothered member than the radio. I'd driven that road plenty of times. There was always at least on Barra. Got back in the car and kept going slowly. The mist wasn't letting up, and I was starting to feel this pressure in my ears like when you're driving up a mountain. It wasn't painful, just enough to notice. I cracked the window to equalize it, but nothing changed and made it another 5 or 6 miles before I started seeing those weird light reflections, the kind that flash off your windshield from nowhere. Except that I weren't coming from behind me. They were in front, flickering just past the trees. Not headlights, more like glints, random and fast, like someone waving a mirror around. I slowed down, but didn't stop. I didn't want to stop. The radio got louder all on its own. I hadn't touched the dial. The whispers were clearer now, but still not words. I swear I heard a voice say something like, "Turn just once." And then it went back to the noise. It checked the volume. It was at 5, same as before, but it sounded like 20. I reached over to shut it off completely, but the screen stayed lit, frozen again, just the station number 91.1, and that noise louder than ever. That's when I saw someone standing on the side of the road, not walking, not flagging, just standing still a few feet from the white line. I hit the brake hard, my light shit. The mitt was a guy, in a hood-up jeans soaked to the knees. She wasn't facing me. He was turned toward the woods, arms down at this sides. Not moving. I stopped about 30 yards back, didn't gout, didn't honk, just sat there with the car idling, and the noise blasting from the speakers. I looked down to kill the radio again. And when I looked back up, he was gone, not walked away. Gone the spot where he'd been. Where he'd been was empty, no movement in the trees, no sound. I backed up slowly at first. Then faster. I didn't want to pass that spot. No real reason, just instinct. To turn around in someone's gravel driveway, about a 4 mile back, and headed the way. I came. The mist started thinning out after a few minutes. The pressure, Re-and-Mir seized up about a mile later. The radio suddenly switched stations, like it had just unfrozen, started playing commercials for Oz Carlot. my phone buzzed with a backlog of notifications. So everything came back to life like nothing had happened. It pulled off at a 24-hour gas station on Route 6, sat in the lot. For maybe 20 minutes with the engine running, didn't go inside, just sat there. The radio worked fine, Bluetooth. Worked phone had full bar, so I've driven that roads once during the day, once and late at night, just to check nothing strand. Either time to miss Nagai on the roadside. Radio stayed normal, I don't drive it anymore though. Even during the day, it feels like I'm not supposed to be there. I was flying a Cessna 182 back from Reading to Medford, just before sunset. I'd done that route maybe 50 times, mostly thing parts or small packages for a shop my cousin runs, nothing fancy. I'd taken off late because of a holdup with the cargo, and I remember being kind of annoyed about it, since I didn't want to be landing in the dark. The weather was clear, a little hazy to the west, but smooth air and good visibility. It was just me up the Renoco pilot. No passengers, had done crate about the size of a microwave strapped in the back. It checked everything twice before takeoff. I always do radio transponder fuel all time to everything clean a filed VFR and stayed around 7,500 feet tons. I leveled out noises. No chatter except a little traffic out of Sacramento. Way I first noticed it just past Shasta, I was maybe 15 minutes north somewhere. Over the forest between Dunmere and the state line, it started as a little glint in the corner of my right side. In down, not bright, not blinking, just this pale yellow dot floating a few hundred feet off my wing. My first thought was that it was another plane, maybe someone coming in from the west-hand angle, but is canned and didn't see any nav lights, no strobes, no fuselage, nothing solid. Just that one glow. I radioed a position check and asked if anyone had traffic at my 10 towers. At negative, nothing on radar, tried not to dwell on it, but I kept glancing over, and it was still resume distances, aim speed, just tracking with like it was pacing me. I turned 10 E. Asked us if it break off, nothing. It adjusted to exact same angles and relative distance, not J. Or like a drone, not fast like a jet, just smooth like it was matching me perfectly. That went in for a solid 5 minutes. Then I did something kind of stupid, a banked hard to the left, a tight turn. I wouldn't normally down unless I was trying to avoid something dangerous, but sharp enough that I expected the thing to overshoot or fall back. It didn't, it matched me. It stayed locked in the same position relative to my wings, smooth as. I don't even know how to describe the movement. It wasn't aggressive or fast, but it was too precise, way too precise, whatever it was. It had not trouble keeping up with men no matter what I did by. Now I had started to sweat a little. It was gripping the yoke too tight and trying to keep my breathing steady. I keyed the mic again and asked Medford Tower if they had anything in my vicinity. I probably sounded a little rattled. They came back, calm Zed. There was no known traffic, no radar blips, nothing visual reported. It didn't respond. He just stared out at the thing. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a basketball, but it gave off this really soft glow, not like a spotlight or a flashlight, more like a lantern behind frosted gall. Ass pale yellow, maybe a hint of green, no sound, no flicker, and still no solid object around it. Just that light. He wanted to believe it was some kind of drone, maybe to tune it something high-end. But it didn't have the movement for that drone's wobble or surge forward a bit when they adjust this thing. Just glided like it was floating on water. It stayed with me for another 10 miles. Then just as it started to descend toward Medford, it drifted back behind the plane. I craned my neck trying to see it, but it was behind the wing and out of view. He expected it to either come up on the other side or disappear completely, but it didn't do either. It just wasn't there anymore, gone like flipping a switch. I called to her again and requested a visual confirmation. On final, they gave me clearance. No mention of any anomalies. I landed clean, taxied over to the hangar and shut everything down. By the time I got out, it was fully dark, no lights in the sky. No sound. I did a full walk around on the plane before leaving just out of habit. Everything looked fine. No burns, no scratches now or heat anywhere. The crate in the back was still latched tight. The guy from the shop the hangar made some joke about my hair sticking up, asked if the wind had been that bad. Didn't laugh. Later that night, I checked the flight data and radio logs. My position reports were all there, but nothing on the tapes about unknown traffic or unusual visuals. So I called the tower the next day and asked if they'd pulled anything from radar in that area around my flight path. They hadn't. Said the skis were clear. No even a weather balloon. It tried lit got hold myself. It had to be some kind of atmospheric effect. Maybe sunlight bouncing off something. Event how. Git tracked me well after sunset. Lacey, my wife, told me not to obsess. She's right. Probably, but I can't stop thinking about how it mirrored every single movement, like it wasn't just following me. It was watching. We'd set up camp just off the trail, a couple miles past where the marked path ends, not way out in the middle of. Now where, but remote enough that we didn't see or hear anyone else the whole time we were out there. It was me and my girlfriend, Lacey, and our dog, Pinto, a wee little mute with one floppy ear, and way too much energy. It was early October, dry and cold, and no hat night. Wanted layers but not freezing the days. Were clear the night's cloudless wick that weekend, mostly because the forecast said it'd be perfect stargazing weather. And we'd both been kind of burnt out from work. Lacey's a nurse, Eat of freelance construction. And we'd both been running on fumes. We got to the trailhead around noon on Saturday, hiked a couple hours of the trees, and found a clearing on a slight slope surrounded on three sides by tall pines. You could just barely see a patch of sky through the canopy. We pitched the tent, made some instant coffee, and sat around until dusk. Pinta chased moths and sniffed every inch of the perimeter like it was a job. Around 9, we had a little fire going and had just started heating up. Canned chili when we noticed how quiet it had gotten. No, that sounds like a thing people say, but I mean it literally. No bugs, no breeze, nor rustling branches. Pinto was standing real still, his ears up staring off into the trees behind the tent. This tail wasn't tucked or anything, but he wasn't wagging either, just alert. Lacey called his name, and he didn't budge. I walked over and touched his back. He flinched a little like he'd been somewhere else in his head. Then he just kind of shook it off and went back to sniffing near the fire. I remember saying something like, "Guess he heard his squirrel drop dead." And we lawed and kept cooking. About an hour later, after we detoned and doused the fire, we climbed into the tent and left the rainfly half-offs, so could see the stars spintled up between. It was dead, still now into tall, just a little warmth still left in the sleeping bags, and that dry cold biting at the tip of your nose. We weren't even talking, just leaning there looking. No, what time it was exactly when. In August, the stars looked wrong, not missing, but just off. It took Niskan to figure it out. There was a patch of sky maybe the size of my outstretched hand where the stars had kind of dimmed, like someone had turned down the brightness in that one spot. At first it thought I'd be thin cloudy, just couldn't see in the dark. Then the patch started moving slowly, almost like it was drifting, but too steady to line to be a cloud. Is a pallidal squinting through the mesh of the tent. Lacey must have noticed mesh shifting because she whispered, "What's up?" I didn't answer right away, was trying to make sense of what I was seeing. As it got closer overhead, I could tell it wasn't a patch of sky. It was thing blocking the stars, not reflecting anything, not giving off light, just a shape totally black gliding silently across the sky. It was a triangle perfecting or close to it, long and flat and wide, with a faint light, each corner pale yellow, almost dimmer than the stars. They didn't blink or flicker. They just held steady, no sound. No how. When Pinta's head was up again, not growling, not winning, just staring his head. "Do you see that?" And Lacey nodded. She was sitting up now. Too, her face looked pale in the dark web. Uth kept watching it move overhead. It wasn't huge, not like those football fields some people talk about sometimes, but it was bigger than a plane and a lot lower. I'd guess maybe 500 feet up. Maybe less. It moved slow. Real slow, like it was cruising. Took maybe 20 seconds to go from one side of the clearing to the other. Then it kept moving east, still totally silent, until it disappeared past the tree line. No acceleration, no flash, just gone. We sat there for a long time after that, just sat. Looking up, I think we were both waiting for something else to happen. As Kondun is ound a plane chasing it, nothing. I remember Lacey saying, "Should we go?" And I almost laughed. Go where? It was already almost midnight, pitch dark, and we were miles from the care. It didn't feel dangerous exactly, just off, like the air had shifted, like something was watching us, but not close enough to do anything. Eventually we laid back down, but neither of us slept much. Pinta kept sitting up every half hour or so, looking in the same direction that thing had. We didn't talk again until sunrise, when we packed up. Everything felt normal again. Birds chirping, breeze in the trees, Pinta wagging his tail and rolling in leaves like the wood shad. Snapped back to regular forest mode on me. E-hike back. I kept turning around, not because I thought we were being followed, but just because like I was waiting to hear branches break behind us or see something move where it shouldn't. When we got back to the parking lot, there was one other cart, hair dusty and old, a beat-up Corolla that hadn't been there when we arrived the day before. The windshield was cracked, and there were leaves piled under the tires, like it'd been parked for a while. I remember checking the plates out. I've stated, didn't think much of it at the time. That was almost a year ago. We've talked about it a couple of times since, but not much. Lacey kind of avoids the subject. Asked her once if she thought it was a drone or some kind of military thing, and she just shrugged, said if it was there way ahead of what we didn't report. It didn't even tell my brother, and he's a pilot. Just felt too weird, not because I'm afraid people wouldn't believe me, but because I don't totally believe it. Like now what we saw, I just don't know what it was. The only thing that still sticks in my mind is how quiet. It was not just the object, but the whole forest, like something pressed pause, like whatever. Where that thing was, it didn't belong here, and the woods knew it. The storm came in fast. I'd just gotten home from work around 6, and the sky had already gone, that weird greenish color it gets before a banner rolls in the air. Felt theavy, like it was pressing down on the house. I live out near the edge of town, where the streetlights thin out, and the power lines dip low between the poles when storm shit out there. They hit hard to grilled a quick dinner while the wind picked up by the time I sat down to eat. Rain had started tapping at the windows, and the sky was flashing every few seconds. Not much thunder at first, just lightning lighting up the clouds, that kind where the whole sky goes white, for a second like someone taking a photo with the flash on around. Seventh, the power flickered once, then went out completely as at the arc with my plate for a minute listening to the wind shove itself against the side of the house. My phone still had some charges. I used it as a flashlight and cleaned up the kitchen. He wasn't too worried outages happened pretty regularly out there when trees got down. It was when I stepped out onto the porch to smoke that I noticed it. Rain had backed off a little, and there was this thick layer of clouds overhead lit up now. And then by the storm he was just standing there watching it, of all liked storms. The way everything else goes quiet, except for the wind and the distant thunder. One of the flashes lit up the sky, and I saw something up in the clouds on the Kel. But it didn't disappear with the lightning. It stayed there, a kind of shape not flat like a plane around her, almost like a pill standing upright or a capsule. It was hard to tell how high up it was because the clouds were moving fast and thick. But it wasn't small. What struck me first was the color. It wasn't reflecting the light, meaning it was glowing on its own, a dull silver, not like metal under a spotlight, but like it had light inside it. The glow sort of pulsed, like it was breathing slow and steady. I watched it for a solid 30 seconds before another flash lit up the sky again, and the thing was still there exactly where it had been. No movement, no sound, just hanging there. I thought maybe it was a trick of the storm, a drone maybe, or a balloon, but it wasn't swaying, and it wasn't shaped like anything I'd seen fly. There were tiny blinking lights on it, and it was too smooth, too clean. He went back inside, got my binoculars from the close, and came back out. When I focused on it, I could see that the pulsing wasn't regular. Sometimes it dimmed for a while, then get brighter again, almost white-hot before fading back to silver. It didn't look like any light I'd seen come from a machine. Then as I was watching get started to rotate slowly, not spinning fast, just a slow, steady turn like it was adjusting itself. But there wasn't any sound, nor rumble. Now wind shifting, it just pivoted a little and stopped. All the hair on my arms stood up. It wasn't thunder. There wasn't a boom or a crack. It was just this low pressure in the air, like something had moved through it. But without actually touching anything, it took a step back from the porch. Raylan realized the crickets had stopped, no insects, no frogs. Seventh, the wind had gone still, just the sound of the rain dripping off the roof. And that quiet pulsing glow in the clouds. I backed into the house and shut the door, not slammed, just closed it slowly. I left the port from the living room window. I could still see it, just barely through the trees. Same positions, same shape, same soft glow, barely changing. Now it stayed like that for maybe 5 more minutes. It just stood there rewatching. Then, without any warning, it started to fade, not blink out, fade like it was being swallowed by the clouds. But nothing around it was moving. The glow got dimmer and dimmer, until it was gone, not behind anything, just gone in a bow. 10 seconds later, the thunder started again, like someone had hit play on the weather. Wind picked up, rains started coming down in sheets, and that normal chaotic feel of a storm came back. All at once a branch hit the roof, my porch light flickered, and came back on. The crickets started chirping again, like they just remembered what they were doing. Power came back around. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept looking out the window, checking the clouds. I didn't see anything else. The next morning, I drove out to the store and stopped to grab gas. He asked the guy, "Whoa, our king, if the storm had knocked out power for everyone, whole strip went dark." He said couple transformers, blue lightning hit him directly. I asked if anyone else had seen anything weird in the sky. He just looked at me and said, "Weird how?" I didn't know what to say to that. I just shrugged and said, "Never mind." The transformers were 2 streets over from my house. It drove past. The one of the poles was scorched, blackened like it had been burned from the inside, not rees nearby. Now hours down, that's all. Nothing ever showed up in the paper. Now weather anomalies reported. Noon else mentioned anything. I haven't seen anything like it again. But that shape, that glowing, I think about it more than I'd like to admit, was out on the north side of the Eagle River Trail, just past where the main path splits and the ridges starts to slope up toward the overlook. It was early September, and the weather was decent cool, but not cold, mostly clear sky. I'd gone out solo that afternoon, just trying to stretch my legs after a rough work week. He wasn't planning to do anything too strenuous, just an out and back before it got dark. I'd been hiking for about 2 hours when I stopped near a switchback to drink some water and take in the view. The valley below looked almost fake, all those deep greens and blues, and not a sound except wind and maybe the distant rush of the creek. He wasn't thinking about anything important, mostly just enjoying the quiet. That's when I noticed some thing move behind the ferrage across from me. Wasn't dramatic, just a small sudden glint of light like metal catching the sun at first. I figured it was a plane, but it wasn't moving sideways. It was rising slowly. At a straight upward angle, I watched it come up from behind the ridge. It was silver smooth, kind of like a pill shape, but flatter on top, now wings or fins or rotor, sit and spin or wobble just straight up. Like it was being lifted on a wire, completely silent. I stood there frozen with my water bottle halfway to my mouth, just watching it until it cleared the ridge. Maybe 300 or 400 drift above. It stopped, just hovered in place. I remember checking my watch out of habit. It was 4:42 p. Then maybe 5 seconds later, it's hot straight up into the sky. No build-up, no noise, just gone like something yanked it upward. I followed it with my eyes as long as I could. It disappeared into the blues of vast. It was like watching a stone fall into deep water. There was nothing after that. No echo now and no birds spooked out of the trees. Everything just went back to normal. I stood there for another minute or two trying to make sense of what I'd seen. But there wasn't much to work with. It wasn't shaped like a drone, wasn't a balloon. I've seen plenty of those in Anchorage, and nothing man-made. I know of moves like that. I didn't add back right away. It felt weird, but not scared, mostly curious. I kept thinking a little further up toward the ridge. It wasn't planning to go all the way to the top, just closer to where I'd seen it tries from. Not that I thought I'd find anything. It was just one of those things you do not autopilot when you're trying to convince yourself. It wasn't as strange as it looked about 30 minutes later. It stopped again, same general direction as before, just higher up as a ton of rock, and took out a protein bar. So when I noticed my watch said 73, that didn't make any sense. I thought maybe I'd misread it earlier, so I pulled out my phone to double check the time. It also said 7:03, and the sun was a little lower than it should have been. Shadows had stretched way out. 'Tis to the retrying to remember how long I'd actually been walking. It hadn't felt like more than maybe an hour since Ace. The things may be less, but who full hours had passed. It didn't sit or nep or zone out. It was walking steadily most of the time. But now I was behind schedule, and I'd have to jog part of the double. Back to beat the dark. It didn't panic, but something about it started to bother me more than it had before. Like I was only just realizing how quiet it was again. No birds, no insects, not even the wind this time. It was that kind of quiet where your ears start to ring a little. Then I heard a crack like a stick breaking. It came from behind. We maybe 20 feet up the trail. I turned around, I'd expecting to see another hiker, or maybe a deer, but the trail was empty. Nothing moved, trees were still. I waited another 10 seconds. Then I picked up my pace and started heading back down. I didn't run, but it wasn't taking my time. Either I checking behind, every couple minutes. I don't usually get nervous out there. I've hiked that trail dozens of times, but I felt like something was off. It didn't see anyone, though about halfway back. I paused again at the same overlook where I had first seen the thing. The sun had dropped more, and the air felt cooler. I looked back toward the ridge, and there it was, same silver shape. But this time it was descending slowly, not falling, but coming down with the same smooth motion. It had dozed going up straight down, no sound. Now Late was around the same height as before, a few 100 feet above the ridge, and coming back down into the exact same spot. It had risen from it and take my eyes off it. It didn't even blink. It was real. I'm as sure of that I've ever been about anything. It sank behind the trees out of view. I watched for a long time. After that, but it didn't come back up. Nothing else moved. I waiting to hear something, branches cracking, an engine event, the sound of a door shutting. But there was nothing, just more of that weird stretched out silence. Eventually I kept walking, my legs felt the AV. I wasn't even thinking about what it could have been anymore, just trying to get back before dark. My head was kind of buzzing like I'd gone too long without eating. When I got to the trailhead, there were only 2 other cars left in the lot. One of them was mine, the other had Washington plates noon inside. I didn't see anyone else around. The air smelled a little metallic, not strong but noticeable. It hot to him. I bet the creek or something in the soil. I got in my car and sat there for a while before starting. It didn't check my phone again. It didn't take any pictures. I didn't want to explain what I'd seen. It didn't even know how I'd start the drive home. Was quiet, not traffic. Remember watching the treetops in the rearview mirror. More than the road. Didn't sleep much that night. I thinking about how precisely it moved, how it had come back to the same place. 2 hours later, like nothing had happened in between. I've gone hiking in that area again since then, but never a one, and I haven't seen anything like that again. Nothing close, but I still think about that stretch of time. I lost it, don't have any explanation for it. The watch, the phone, they matched. It wasn't a dead battery or a glitch. It was just 2 hours gone.